Hello everybody, before the video starts I would like you all to subscribe and like the video. That's it, enjoy. Chapter 1. Zelos. In the middle of a dark and seemingly endless ocean, there was a lone figure swimming forward, his arms moving slowly but steadily against the heavy water. The abyss beneath him stretched endlessly, its depth impossible to measure, and though he could not see the bottom, he kept traveling forward, his body floating yet sinking at the same time in the cold emptiness. After a short while, the calm surface was broken as a massive creature emerged, its monstrous jaws opening wide as though preparing to devour him whole. The sight was overwhelming, the kind that could make a person freeze in fear, but before the beast could close the distance, a gigantic arm marked with strange crimson lines reached down from above and pulled him away. In that moment, the sensation of drowning ended, and he opened his eyes to realize that it was nothing but a dream. Zelos, wake up. It is time for your training. The deep voice came from Kratos, the man with the marked arm, who was not only the one waking him but also his father. This daily routine was something Zelos had already grown accustomed to. He did not resent it, nor did he complain, for his desire was to become stronger, and he accepted each day of training without hesitation. On the surface, one might see him as just another child, but in truth, Zelos was far from ordinary. Zelos was a transmigrator, a soul from Earth who had died and awakened in a body that should never have existed in the world of God of War. He knew this the very moment he opened his new eyes, for he instantly recognized the faces of the people around him. His mother was Faye, a woman he had only ever seen in cutscenes, and his father was Kratos, a figure he had fought with and against countless times while replaying the games. The familiarity confirmed the reality he now lived in, and the truth settled deep into him. At first, excitement filled him. The idea of living in such a world, of meeting these characters he admired, was thrilling. Yet, reality soon struck, bringing with it the heavy weight of dread. This was not a safe place, not a fantasy meant to be admired from a distance. It was a world where gods walked freely, where monsters could appear without warning, and where wars between divine beings could decide the fate of mortals. Even if he was the son of Kratos and Faye, even if his bloodline was not ordinary, he could not predict what kind of destiny awaited him. It was during those uncertain thoughts that something beyond comprehension appeared within his mind. A single vial floated there, shimmering with an otherworldly glow, and beside it appeared the image of his old body, the one he once had on Earth. Somehow, within that space, he could move, and with instinct guiding him, he made the image of his old self drink the vial. It was called the essence of the Sorcerer Lord. The moment it was consumed, a wave of clarity burst through him. His thoughts sharpened as though his brain now operated with a precision it never had before. His body, even as a newborn, carried the sensation of strength and agility, enough that he felt he could stand and walk immediately. More important than either of those changes was the flood of knowledge that filled him. Countless streams of magical theories, spells, and systems embedded themselves into his memory, forming what felt like an infinite grimoire that he could consult at will. From that day forward, magic became his greatest reliance. No matter what branch of sorcery he thought about, the knowledge surfaced within his mind, and he could shape it into practice. Light magic, time manipulation, elemental spells, anything he could imagine revealed itself to him, often more detailed than what he remembered from other worlds and stories. Out of all of them, light and time magic fascinated him the most, particularly because they reminded him of powers he admired in the Black Clover universe. He devoted his focus to these, exploring their possibilities with the curiosity of a scholar and the determination of a warrior. At the same time, he designed healing spells, crafting them carefully so they would aid him and others in the future. All of this, he accomplished successfully before he even reached the age of 5. When Zelos finally turned 5, Kratos, who had already noticed the uncanny similarities between them, both in appearance and in temperament, decided it was time for his son to begin proper training. While Kratos chose not to impose the brutal Spartan regime upon him, he insisted on instilling the discipline of a warrior, ensuring that Zelos understood strength was nothing without control. This became the new rhythm of his childhood. Meanwhile, years earlier, when Zelos had been 3, Atreus was born, making Zelos older than his younger brother by exactly 3 years. Knowing this detail shaped his perspective further, as it made him realize how different the path of his life might become compared to the story he once knew. Now, Zelos stood before Kratos, gripping tightly onto a wooden sword, a simple weapon crafted by his father's own hands. Though it was plain in appearance, it held weight and balance suited for training, and to Zelos, it carried significance as his first real tool for battle. One of the greatest blessings granted by the essence of the Sorcerer Lord was not only knowledge of magic, but also an unnatural aptitude for combat. Whether it was swordplay, spear work, hand-to-hand fighting, or even the subtle control of stance and breathing, his body seemed to learn and adapt far faster than what should have been possible. It was as though instinct itself had been rewritten. Because of this, even though Kratos was overwhelmingly stronger, their sparring sessions were not one-sided. Kratos would often hold back his raw strength to focus on technique, relying on skill rather than brute power, and under those conditions, Zelos could keep up with him. Every clash of wooden weapons became a test of timing, reflexes, and control. Each step, each strike, each parry pushed Zelos to prove that his talent was more than mere luck. It was something real, something that made him capable of standing against even the ghost of Sparta when the battle was fought on skill alone. 19 comments 0 vote. Chapter 2. Magic. After finishing his training with Kratos, Zelos was given free time, something his father often allowed once the day's sparring was over. Rather than resting, Zelos used this freedom to wander into the nearby forest. Though only 6 years old, Kratos trusted him enough to roam unsupervised, a decision that reflected how reliable Zelos' strength and control had already become. Venturing deeper into the woods, Zelos prepared himself carefully. The forest itself was full of enchantments woven into its boundaries, protective staves that shielded the area and prevented most monsters from entering. Drawing inspiration from the natural barriers around him, Zelos began casting his own stealth magic, shaping it in a way that blended him seamlessly into his surroundings. For extra safety, he layered another protective spell on top of it. This was his first real attempt at moving far from the forest's security, and though confident in his abilities, he could not ignore the unease that came with leaving. He checked and rechecked his preparations, unwilling to risk an early death through carelessness. Once he was certain, Zelos took a deep breath and began. Levitation. The spell activated instantly, and his body lifted from the ground. A grin spread across his face as the magic worked exactly as he envisioned. The sensation of floating eased the lingering fear he once had of heights. Slowly, he rose until the forest canopy lay beneath him. Satisfied, he released a controlled burst of wind from the soles of his feet, which propelled him forward, turning levitation into true flight. Zelos soared beyond the enchanted boundary of the forest, passing through the protective stave that safeguarded his family. That barrier, he knew, existed to keep hostile gods and their servants from finding Faye. Exiting it was risky, but it was necessary for the test he wanted to carry out. The first thing he did after crossing was to check his magic. He touched his chest lightly, ensuring his stealth remained active and that his form was still invisible to the naked eye. Confirming that it worked, he flew further, searching for a worthy target. Eventually, he found one, a giant fire troll resting on the ground, its heavy weapon lying beside it. Zelos landed quietly, his presence hidden. The troll stirred for a moment, opening its eyes briefly, but seeing and sensing nothing unusual, it closed them again, drifting back into slumber. It seems the stealth is a success, Zelos thought. Summoning a glowing magic circle before him, he channeled power into it until it released a massive sphere of ice. The spell struck the troll directly, freezing its body solid in an instant. The flames and embers that clung to its form were extinguished along with its life. From the fallen creature, Zelos gathered the essence of the fire troll, and energy crystallized into a form that he knew could later be used to strengthen a weapon of his own. Encouraged by the result, Zelos took to the skies again, continuing his hunt. Across Midgard, he searched for elemental trolls, seeking out 5 different essences: fire, water, thunder, air, and earth. The search took time, but his efforts bore fruit. By the end, he had collected the cores of 5 fire trolls, 3 water trolls, and 1 of each of the other types. The collection satisfied him, giving him both material and confidence for the future. As he prepared to return, something caught his attention. In a clearing below, a female magician was locked in combat with a revenant. She wielded plant-based magic, summoning massive branches and roots that twisted upward to bind her foe. Zelos observed from above, remaining hidden as he watched the duel unfold. The revenant, agile and dangerous, slipped away repeatedly by using teleportation, but the magician persisted, answering with one spell after another until she finally overpowered and destroyed the creature. The fight stirred something in Zelos. Watching her manipulation of nature gave him new inspiration for his own path of magic development. He filed away every detail for later study, then turned and flew back toward the forest. Along the way, he noticed ravens circling high above, their glowing eyes carrying traces of enchantment. He recognized them at once, the ravens of Odin, spies scattered across Midgard to observe all that happened. Carefully, he adjusted his stealth, ensuring they would not detect him. After several cautious moments, Zelos finally crossed back into the protection of the stave. Faye hadn't questioned him when he arrived, which made Zelos quietly assume that his mother had not sensed his departure at all. That, more than anything, confirmed his preparations had worked. When Zelos returned, the first to greet him was Atreus, who had been waiting patiently near the doorway. Inside, Faye stood by the hearth, preparing a meal for the three of them. Kratos, however, was nowhere to be seen. It was not unusual, Atreus had once mentioned that their father often disappeared into the forest without explanation. Zelos understood the habit well enough. Knowing Kratos' past, he accepted these absences without complaint. Mother, can you teach me magic? Zelos asked suddenly, his voice carrying more eagerness than hesitation as he turned toward Faye. She paused mid-motion, glancing at him with a knowing expression. Why? So you can run off again. She replied evenly, her words cutting through any hope that his earlier adventure had gone unnoticed. Zelos blinked, then gave a half smile as though caught in a harmless game. Oh, so you found out, huh? He said, as if admitting it meant nothing serious, though both of them knew the risk he had taken. Faye chuckled softly, shaking her head. You are far too young to think you can fool me. But, yes, I will grant your request. If you wish to learn magic, then I will teach you. Joy sparked across Zelos' face immediately. Unable to contain it, he scooped Atreus into his arms and lifted him high, laughing with genuine excitement. Whether it came from the ordinariness of his past life on Earth or from the lingering influence of the essence, Zelos could not be sure, but when it came to the subject of magic, there was always a spark inside him, an unshakable eagerness to learn more. 14 comments 0 vote. Chapter 3. Faye's teaching. The following year, after finishing his training with Kratos, Zelos would immediately hurry home, eager for the lessons that awaited him with Faye. Unlike Kratos, who taught through sparring and discipline, Faye's instruction focused on magic, particularly protective arts. She guided Zelos through the foundations of shield magic, methods to counter curses, ways to disperse hostile enchantments, and the use of elemental spells that were tied to the Vanir tradition. At first, Zelos could not help but feel a little disappointed. He remembered that Vanir magic itself was derived from Jotnar magic, and he worried that what he was learning was nothing more than a diluted form of something greater. Out of respect, however, he kept his thoughts hidden. He listened quietly, never wanting to offend his mother. Yet, as the lessons continued, he began to notice small details. What Faye was teaching was not only Vanir magic, there were subtle traces of giant magic woven into the theory, differences so faint they could almost be ignored. To most, they would be indistinguishable, but with the sharp clarity given to him by the essence, Zelos saw them for what they were. Every lesson with Faye became a starting point for his own experiments. When she demonstrated barrier magic, Zelos refined it further. What began as a simple protective dome evolved into something stronger, resembling the shimmering shields of Stephen Strange or the layered defenses he remembered from Freyrin. In time, Zelos developed a barrier so dense that he estimated even a full-force strike from Kratos would shatter against it before reaching him. Using this as his foundation, he pursued a greater idea, a spell that mirrored the infinity technique of Gojo Satoru, one that would make it impossible for any attack to touch him because the space between him and the attacker would stretch into infinity. The first version succeeded, but it demanded immense focus. He had to consciously maintain it at all times, draining his concentration. The second version was improved to draw energy not only from his reserves but also from the environment around him. Finally, after countless refinements, Zelos created a form of the barrier that was invisible to the eye, subtle to the senses, and fueled both by himself and the world around him. It concealed its own existence, ensuring that no one would even notice when it was active. He applied the same mindset to every subject Faye introduced. Antikur's techniques, for example, became more than defensive spells. Zelos expanded them into versatile counter magic, able to unravel nearly any hostile force directed against him. Faye, observant as always, noticed something unusual during these sessions. The flow of magic in the forest seemed to thin whenever Zelos practiced too deeply. Though he corrected the flaw later, it was the first sign of how vast his potential truly was. You are a fast learner, Faye told him one evening, after he revealed the infinity barrier to her. Her usually calm tone held genuine surprise. It is not even an exaggeration to call you more talented than Freya herself. Zelos gave a humble smile. Surely you jest, mother. I know I am still far from that. Inwardly, though, he recalled an anime from his past life. I was reincarnated as the seventh prince so I can take my time perfecting my magical ability. That protagonist's endless pursuit of magical mastery mirrored what Zelos now wanted for himself. It is not an exaggeration, Faye replied, though her voice carried more concern than pride. If you continue on this path, you will not only create spells that break boundaries but could even wield the power to shape reality itself. Her words carried the weight of foresight, for she understood what Odin would do if he ever discovered such a possibility. Do not worry, mother, Zelos answered with quiet confidence. Every spell I create is locked within the black sea of thoughts inside my mind. They are guarded by the monster that lives there. If anyone tries to intrude and read my memories, they will only drown in my thoughts instead. He spoke of the dream he once had, the endless ocean, the abyss, and explained how he had crafted a dual layer of consciousness, one mind observing the other, ensuring the safeguard always held. Beyond defensive magic, Faye also introduced him to the art of summoning. Zelos took quickly to it, creating flocks of spectral eagles and owls, each capable of sharing its vision with him. They became his eyes across Midgard, much like Odin's ravens. Owls, in particular, served as natural predators, able to hunt the ravens directly. To protect them, Zelos imbued them with his concealment spell, the same one he had used to remain unseen while flying. With these familiars released into the wild, Zelos gained freedom unlike ever before. He could explore far beyond the forest's protection without leaving his home, hunt trolls for their essences, and even locate dwarves to study their craft. Each day, his reach expanded, and with it, his preparations for the future. While Zelos spent his free time wandering through the forest, both Faye and Kratos remained at the cabin. It was one of the rare afternoons when Kratos stayed instead of vanishing into the woods. The sun was still high, and the light filtered softly through the wooden walls. Kratos sat in silence, his eyes fixed on Faye as she gently tended to young Atreus. How is Zelos doing in training? Faye asked, breaking the quiet between them. Kratos answered without hesitation. He grows stronger every day. It will not be long before he surpasses me. There was no embellishment in his tone, only truth. Faye's lips curved into a faint smile. He is also advancing in magic. In that path, too, he may be destined to surpass both of us. Perhaps even more quickly than we expect. Kratos grunted in reply, the sound heavy but not dismissive. It is fortunate that discipline tempers his strength, Faye continued. That is perhaps his most defining trait, the one thing he has embraced fully. Another grunt came from Kratos, though softer this time. He remembered the way Zelos had cast the infinite barrier to protect Atreus without hesitation. Zelos had even offered to do the same for him, though Kratos refused. It was not pride alone, it was that Kratos wanted his son to learn that true strength was not only about protecting others but also enduring without protection. You must be better than me, Zelos, Kratos thought to himself, though his expression revealed nothing. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Zelos stood surrounded by the quiet rustle of leaves. Through the eyes of the spectral eagles he had summoned, he surveyed the wide expanse of Midgard. Each eagle carried his sight to different corners of the realm. Through one, he saw two dwarves working separately in distant places, their crafts glinting with the skill of their kin. Through another, his vision settled upon a strange and fated sight, the place where Mimir was imprisoned. The eagle circled, its keen gaze fixed on the figure bound to the tree. Mimir lifted his head slowly, his expression calm yet curious, his one good eye following the bird's path. Though Zelos remained hidden far away, he felt a subtle shiver at the thought, Mimir had noticed. Chapter 4. Elementals. More and more time passed by, and Zelos slowly turned into what could almost be called an avid adventurer, as he now had his eagles constantly watching over the entirety of Midgard, with him using their vision to search for more trolls so that he could harvest their essence. From the very beginning, Zelos had set himself a clear goal, which was to collect 20 essences for each of the different elements, because he had a project in mind that required such a collection. After he had made enough progress, Zelos then began the actual construction of what he had envisioned. The idea was to build an orb that would act as a magical core, and for this purpose, he created not just one, but 5 separate cores. Each core was made entirely from pure mana, which Zelos carefully condensed and stabilized before adding anything else. After that, he began refining and combining the essence he acquired from the trolls during his hunts. Day after day, he added more to the orbs, slowly layering them until he reached his requirement of 20 for each. The first orb to be completed was the fire orb, as fire trolls were the most abundant across Midgard, and their essence was much easier to obtain compared to the other elements. The second one was the earth orb, which took him almost 6 months before it was finished, a little longer than the fire orb, which had been done 2 months earlier. The third was the lightning orb, which required 7 months of steady gathering and careful refinement before it was stable. After that came the wind orb, which took about 8 months, as the element was less common and harder to purify. The one that tested Zelos' patience the most was the water orb, as water essence was extremely rare to find in its pure form. Most of what he encountered was naturally ice elemental essence, not true water, and this forced him to search much longer than expected. In the end, it took him over 1.5 years before he finally managed to complete the 20 pieces necessary to finish the water orb. During all this time spent hunting for essence, Zelos' skills in crafting improved more and more. He had his eagles secretly observe the 2 greatest craftsmen in Midgard, Brock and Sindri, while they worked in their forge. Through their eyes, Zelos carefully studied the movements of their hands, the way they tempered materials, and the subtle details that set their craftsmanship apart. Whether the 2 brothers were unaware that they were being watched, or whether they did know and simply did not care, Zelos could not be sure. It might have been that they believed only they themselves could accomplish what they were doing, regardless of who observed them. Even with all his time spent on gathering and crafting, Zelos did not neglect his training. He continued sparring with Kratos on a daily basis, still using his signature wooden sword, which by now had almost become a natural extension of his arm. His magical development also did not stall, as he recreated several spells he remembered from his past life. One of them was the Zoltrak spell, a highly concentrated shot of mana that he combined with homing and piercing properties, increasing both its accuracy and its lethality far beyond ordinary projectiles. In addition to this, Zelos also dedicated effort to reconstructing various plant-based spells, something he remembered from the Black Clover anime. Among these, he even managed to develop healing magic that was directly associated with plant manipulation. When he noticed that Faye's body was gradually beginning to weaken, he offered to use the healing magic to help her. However, Faye refused his offer. She seemed to have already accepted her fate, and she did not even attempt to hide the fact that she had long since resigned herself to dying one day soon. Why, mother? Zelos asked softly, his voice carrying more curiosity than fear, for he wanted to understand what was truly going through his mother's mind. Faye then turned her gaze toward him and smiled, a smile so calm and gentle that it seemed to wash away the tension building inside him, giving him a small moment of peace in his restless state of mind. Death is not something to be afraid of, Zelos. It is simply a natural part of life, Faye explained, her tone steady and warm, as though she had already made peace with her own fate. We may try to delay the inevitable, or we may choose to accept it. But no matter what we do, it will come. Always remember this, the culmination of love is grief. And yet, we love despite that inevitability. We open our hearts knowing one day they will ache. To grieve deeply means to have loved fully. So, open your heart to the world as you have opened it to me, and you will discover every reason to keep living in it. For me, it has been a blessing beyond measure to have 3 beautiful boys who love me so much that they would grieve when I am gone. Her words, though meant to comfort, carried with them the weight of an unavoidable truth. Still, she embraced Zelos tenderly, wrapping him in a hug that conveyed the depth of her love, and Zelos found himself returning the embrace with equal warmth. For him, the moment was more than simple comfort. In his previous life, in that other world he once came from, he had never known the love of parents. He had lived without ever experiencing what it meant to be cared for as a son. But here, in this life, he had found it. And yet, the cruel twist of fate was that one of those bonds he treasured would be far too short-lived. Because of Faye's condition and her quiet acceptance of it, Kratos began staying at home more often, as though silently acknowledging what was happening even if he did not speak of it aloud. The change was subtle, but it was there. Kratos' presence became more constant, a rare thing in itself. In response, Zelos gradually took on the role of providing for the family, taking responsibility for the hunts and the gathering of food. Though he was still young, both his strength and his talents had already earned their trust. To aid him in this new duty, Faye crafted and gave him a bow of his own. It was similar in design to the one she would later pass down to Atreus, yet this bow was not a mere replica. Along its body, Faye had carefully engraved his name, a mark that made it clear this weapon was uniquely his, a gift meant only for him. For Zelos, the bow was more than just a tool for hunting, it was a reminder of his mother's love, and of the responsibilities he had to shoulder for the sake of his family. While quietly accepting what would eventually be inevitable, Zelos turned his attention back to the project that had occupied his mind for so long, the 5 elemental orbs. Each orb contained within it 20 essences harvested from trolls of their respective elements. Fire, earth, lightning, wind, and water, all gathered through years of patient hunting and refinement. Zelos carefully purified each essence and enhanced it further with his own magic, weaving them into a structure that was not only stable but capable of growth. When the cores were finally complete, Zelos went a step further. He did not simply leave them as raw containers of power. Instead, he breathed into each of them a simple form of consciousness, an artificial awareness bound entirely to his will. They were not beings with personalities or independent thought, but rather extensions of himself, constructs that existed to obey his commands without hesitation. Standing before the floating orbs, Zelos gave his first order. Seek out the primordial places of your respective elements. Absorb the primordial essence that lies hidden there. Then return to me after 5 years, he commanded, his tone calm but resolute. At once, the orbs responded, their forms glowing faintly with their elemental lights before they scattered into the skies, each soaring in a different direction across the vastness of Midgard and beyond. Zelos watched them disappear from sight, knowing that this was only the beginning of their journey. His true goal was not simply to collect power but to create 5 creatures, each born from primordial essence itself. With such beings at his side, creatures tied directly to the raw forces of creation, Zelos would not only gain allies of immense strength but also permanent access to primordial elements, an advantage that could shape his path for years to come. 16 comments 0 vote. Chapter 5. Infinity. Another year quietly passed, with Zelos continuing his studies under Kratos, focusing on combat skills and the discipline of strengthening his physical body. What became clear to both of them was how overwhelming the essence of the Sorcerer's Lord truly was. The blessing not only enhanced Zelos' magical ability but also granted him natural growth in terms of physical strength, stamina, and adaptability. Unlike most mages, who were vulnerable in close combat, Zelos was developing into an all-around fighter who could match both at a distance and at arm's reach. At the same time, his magical studies expanded into more complex fields. Through experimentation, Zelos managed to create a functional golem from the raw magic in the surrounding area. The achievement gave him satisfaction, but he noticed quickly that these constructs were fragile in nature. Without enchantments layered on them, the golems crumbled easily under pressure, making them unreliable in battle. This discovery pushed Zelos towards studying enchantment magic more seriously, hoping to create a system that would reinforce such creations. It was during these thoughts that another idea emerged. Zelos recalled a character from the 7 Deadly Sins, someone he considered to have the most overpowered magical ability in anime, Merlin, with her infinity magic. That ability allowed any spell to remain active indefinitely, its effect maintained without faltering, and even Merlin's death could not undo it. The concept fascinated Zelos, for if he could replicate such a thing, it would become one of the strongest foundations of his magical path. He began theorizing on how such a spell could function. From all his studies, he knew one principle above all else: every spell demanded a cost. Every casting required mana, every effect had a price. Infinity, however, seemed to ignore that rule. How could a spell remain active forever, without draining the caster endlessly? How could it loop infinitely without breaking? Zelos questioned this again and again, the thoughts refusing to leave his mind. This problem became the first true obstacle since receiving the essence. He wrestled with the concept for months, often losing himself in thought to the point that Faye and Kratos noticed his distraction. What troubles you, Zelos? Faye asked him one evening, her tone carrying both concern and curiosity. I'm struggling with a concept, Zelos admitted honestly. It's about a form of magic that runs on the principle of infinity. The goal is to make a spell remain active for as long as I desire, years, centuries, unless I myself cancel it. His words made Faye pause. It was the first time she had heard her son confess difficulty in grasping a magical concept. She shook her head softly, aware that in all her knowledge, both Vanir and Giant, there was nothing remotely close to what he described. It seemed impossible. Perhaps, Faye said gently, if you cannot conceive it, then it may not be possible, at least not yet. Perhaps, Zelos echoed, though his eyes still carried determination. Inwardly, he admitted the truth. Maybe it really is impossible. Maybe infinity isn't a spell but a trait, something innate, like a divine gift. In its original world, it was a power even the demon king and goddess sought after. Perhaps it cannot be replicated here. But then, another thought struck him. He remembered the infinity barrier he had already created, the one inspired by Gojo's curse technique. That spell functioned on the manipulation of space and time, placing infinite distance between himself and an incoming attack. If he could apply similar principles, perhaps infinity magic was not impossible after all. With this in mind, Zelos designed a new enchantment circle. Its function was simple in theory but complex in practice. The circle would trap a spell in stasis, looping its activation so that each casting was reset over and over. He tested it with a basic fire spell. To his satisfaction, the flame reignited endlessly, repeating itself without him manually recasting it. This breakthrough became the cornerstone of his work. He refined the process further. By adjusting the magic circle, he discovered a way to combine spells before they were released, creating layered effects. Two separate fire spells could merge into one flame with double the intensity. With more adjustments, he began developing stacking effects, amplifying simple spells into devastating forces. The work consumed years. From ages 7 to 10, Zelos poured his focus into refining this system. 3 years may not have seemed long compared to how slow magical development usually was, where even a single advancement could take centuries, but for Zelos, it felt long. The essence gave him overwhelming clarity, but infinity still required constant trial and error. Finally, when he succeeded in fully stabilizing the technique, the result filled him with quiet satisfaction. A single spark of fire, when placed within the circle, became an eternal blaze, endlessly sustained and infinitely amplified, waiting only for release. Zelos, now 10 years old, returned home with a smile that he could not hide. During a family meal, both Faye and Kratos immediately sensed the change. Have you succeeded, Zelos? Faye asked, watching his expression closely. Yes, mother, Zelos answered, his voice unable to mask his excitement. I've succeeded. He then explained the workings of his infinity enchantment, his hands moving slightly as he described the process. Kratos listened silently, his expression unreadable, while Atreus simply continued eating, uninterested in words he could not understand. At one point, Zelos' eyes shifted toward Kratos, noticing the Leviathan axe resting at his father's side. Father, he said suddenly, would you like me to enchant your weapon? Kratos looked at him directly. What would you do? I want to amplify its frost, to make its power to freeze 1,000 times stronger. Kratos shook his head slightly. I have no need for that strength. But if the day comes when such a thing is required, then we will speak again. Zelos nodded, accepting the answer without protest. The conversation ended there, and the four of them continued their meal, the quiet atmosphere broken only by the sound of Atreus chewing, unaware of the significance of what his brother had just achieved. 21 comments 0 vote. Chapter 6. Smartest Man Alive. While Zelos devoted much of his time to creating and refining his spells, his summoned eagles were never idle. They tirelessly hunted Odin's ravens across the skies of Midgard, disrupting the Allfather's eyes wherever they found them. At the same time, they served as Zelos' own window to the world, scouting the land far and wide. Through their vision, Zelos observed Midgard as if the entire realm were a living television, full of endless channels for him to study. Of all the sights he watched, there were 3 figures who drew his attention the most: Brock, Sindri, and Mimir. The dwarven brothers fascinated him with their skill. Every movement of the hammer, every careful strike against metal, and every enchantment they embedded into their crafts became a lesson for Zelos, even if they were unaware they had an audience. Though he did not speak to them directly, their silent instruction deepened his understanding of craftsmanship, and Zelos treasured each detail. Yet it was Mimir who intrigued him most of all. Bound unnaturally to a tree, his form restrained by powerful magic, Mimir was unlike anyone Zelos had ever seen. More than his condition, however, it was the knowledge that Mimir carried which captivated Zelos. The eagle's sharp gaze often lingered on the bound man, drawn again and again by the sense of wisdom hidden behind those tired eyes. One day, as the eagle perched nearby, Mimir finally spoke. How about a conversation, lad? He offered casually, his voice carrying a lilt of amusement. He had noticed how the eagle's watchful eyes never wavered from him, and in those eyes he recognized something he once held himself: relentless curiosity. Who are you, strange bearded man in a tree? Zelos asked, speaking through the eagle's body. Though he already knew Mimir's name and reputation, he chose to play along. Mimir let out a hearty laugh. Strange bearded man, is it? Well, I suppose that's not untrue. But allow me to introduce myself properly. I am the greatest ambassador to the gods, the giants, and all the creatures of the 9 realms. I know every corner of these lands, every language spoken, every war waged, every bargain struck. They call me, Mimir. Smartest man alive. And I have the answer to your every question. His words rang with pride, his voice carrying a mix of boast and jest, as if he had repeated this declaration 1,000 times before. Zelos listened silently, letting the man revel in his titles before speaking again. What are you doing here, Mimir? Why are you bound to a tree? The ambassador's expression shifted, his tone softening with feigned humor. Ah, that. Sadly, not everyone appreciated my talents as much as they should have. Being the smartest man alive has its drawbacks, you see. Let's just say I earned myself this fine seat, courtesy of the Allfather's less charitable side. He chuckled, but the weight in his words betrayed more than he admitted. How unfortunate, Mimir, Zelos replied evenly, his eagle tilting its head. Before the conversation could continue further, a sudden fluctuation rippled through the space around the tree. Zelos immediately recognized it, the distinct tearing of the air that came with teleportation. Reacting on instinct, he activated the concealment charm woven into the eagle, and in an instant, the bird vanished into thin air, severing the connection. From the safety of his hidden vantage, Zelos watched and waited, his curiosity now tempered by caution. This marked the beginning of an unusual kind of friendship between the two of them, one that neither had really expected. Mimir would spend hours telling stories and recounting tales about his past, while Zelos would simply listen, rarely interrupting. Almost every tale that came from Mimir's mouth followed a familiar pattern, either ending in some tragic event, or in some act of lust, or sometimes a mixture of both, where tragedy and desire went hand in hand. Still, Mimir spoke without restraint, and Zelos, despite finding the repetition strange, continued to lend his ears. For the boy, the stories were less about the events themselves and more about the way knowledge could be carried within them. While listening to Mimir's endless accounts, Zelos often shifted his focus towards something else, the magic that bound the man to the tree. The restraints themselves pulsed faintly with divine power, woven through with layers of enchantments that seemed far beyond the crude workings of ordinary Vanir or Jotnar sorcery. Zelos studied them whenever he could, carefully analyzing their structure, as he wanted to ensure that if the day came, Mimir could be released without requiring death as the price. Mimir, who was sharper than he pretended, noticed this behavior sooner rather than later. What are you doing, lad? He asked one day, curiosity in his tone as he saw the eagle perch unusually close to the runes carved into the bark. I'm studying the magical composition of your restraints, Zelos answered plainly through the eagle's body. What do you know? Maybe one day, I'll be able to free you. Mimir let out a weary laugh at that. That would be tricky, boy. Odin made certain no blade nor weapon could ever sever these bonds. He went to great lengths to ensure my fate. In a world of magic, Zelos countered, his voice carrying the same stubborn pride that often surfaced in his studies, something that seems impossible is usually just something not studied enough. Mimir chuckled again, amused by the boy's confidence, though there was no mockery in his laughter this time, only curiosity. From that point forward, their talks carried more than just stories. The conversation slowly shifted into exchanges of knowledge. Mimir, seeing Zelos' hunger for understanding, began to share fragments of his own vast intellect, the roots of languages, the histories of different lands, and subtle lessons about how realms connected with each other. Zelos, in return, occasionally shared ideas and concepts that were entirely foreign to Mimir, fragments of theories that sounded half impossible, but fascinating enough that even the smartest man alive found himself pondering them. Thus, the two developed a bond. One was an ageless scholar, bound and silenced by gods, while the other was a boy touched by power, growing sharper with each passing day. This has been the break that Mimir had been hoping for from the everyday torture that he was experiencing from Odin, while Zelos was using what Mimir was teaching as a support or even foundation of some of the magics that Zelos was developing. 16 comments 0 vote. Chapter 7. True Nature. With the Infinity Project finally finished, Zelos deliberately turned more of his attention back to family life, spending longer afternoons with Faye and with Atreus as the boy grew into a nervous, awkward child. Kratos had never been wrong to treat Atreus like something fragile. Every winter, the younger boy fell sick in ways that worried even Faye. Atreus' coughs sometimes ended with blood, and Zelos would do what he could to staunch the wounds and mend the body. Yet there was a balance at work inside the boy that Zelos could not fix by healing flesh alone, a struggle between a physical nature and a spiritual nature, two halves at war. Zelos could repair bones, close lungs, and knit skin, but he could not soothe the spiritual discord that lay beneath those symptoms, that, he believed, required Kratos in a way that medical cures did not. Because of that, one hunting afternoon, Zelos decided to speak plainly. He walked beside Kratos through the trees until a moment opened between their strides, then stopped and looked at his father. Father, may I discuss a matter with you? Zelos asked. Kratos halted, turned, and met him. It was the first time Zelos had used such a deliberate, serious tone with him. What is it? Kratos asked. Have you thought about telling Atreus the truth about our nature? Zelos said, the question cutting straight to the heart of the secret both of them held. For a moment Kratos' face hardened. He had guarded the truth carefully, thinking he was the only one to bear its burden. But Zelos had not been fooled by secrecy. He had understood the moment he awoke in this body. How did you know? Kratos asked, surprise sharp enough to make the words short. Zelos raised his hand and murmured a quick incantation, perfect cube. In an instant they were enclosed in a small white chamber, a cube of his own making. The room had no windows and no sound could leak in or out, no one could teleport in, no eavesdropper could pierce it without his permission. The space was deliberately plain, featureless white walls and a blank floor, so there was nothing to distract from the matter at hand. Kratos looked around, alert and suspicious, while Zelos watched him calmly. I figured it out while I was practicing magic, Zelos explained. Mother's magic signature is different from ours. But your signature, Atreus' signature, and mine, they match. We share the same kind of nature, something Faye does not have. I checked against other residents of Midgard to be sure, simple scans through our familiars, sight and small signature probes, and it confirmed what I suspected. Kratos' jaw tightened. I hoped to spare him a lifetime of anguish, he said quietly. I thought keeping it hidden was better. I did not expect you to learn so young. I know you wanted to protect him, Zelos said, straightforward. I respect that. But Atreus is growing weaker. His sickness is not only a body failing, it's the two natures fighting inside him. If left alone, it could turn fatal. Kratos closed his eyes for a long breath, the silence in the white cube stretched by the strange geometry Zelos had woven into it. The cube, Zelos explained, contained a mild time dilation field. Subjective time inside flowed faster than outside. It gave them more of their own time to speak, test ideas, and try quick demonstrations without losing hours in the woods beyond the cube's walls. Kratos realized there was comfort in the design, time to think with fewer consequences, and it made the choice feel heavier. Why have you not told me before? Kratos asked at last, anger edged with regret. Zelos answered plainly, I wanted to honor your choice to keep it secret. But the situation has changed. I have been healing Atreus' body, but every treatment only repairs a symptom. The root is the internal conflict. We need a plan that addresses both the spirit and the flesh. If we do not act, I fear the sickness will worsen. Kratos considered the boy before him, his son, and a living reminder of a past he had tried to bury. He let the silence sit a moment longer, feeling the extra hours in the cube like a weight and a relief. Finally he said, low and deliberate, we will not throw him into the world without guiding him. But I cannot promise I will tell him everything at once. Some truths must be given slowly, some must be shaped by circumstance. Zelos nodded. He did not press for an immediate confession. Instead he proposed the practical next steps he had already been thinking about. More frequent, gentle monitoring of Atreus' spiritual state, combining Faye's veneer remedies for the body with controlled exercises to help Atreus recognize and name his inner shifts, and consulting Mimir for lore about binding and harmonizing dual natures. Kratos listened. The white cube gave them time to outline a beginning, small steps rather than a single revelation. When they left the cube, the forest looked unchanged, as if no time had passed. Kratos' expression was unreadable, but Zelos felt a cautious shift. The secret would not be spilled recklessly. It would be handled, slowly, with care, and with the deliberate discipline that Kratos believed in. It is not yet the time to reveal it, Kratos finally said after a heavy pause, his voice carrying the weight of a decision he had settled on long ago. I would ask only this of you. Continue to heal your brother whenever you can, until the day comes when the truth must be spoken. And keep this conversation between us, Zelos. Not a word to Atreus. Kratos' tone left little room for argument, though Zelos caught the faint shadow of hesitation buried beneath it. The man had made his choice, a choice that would one day become a source of regret. In the original course of fate, Atreus' condition nearly cost him his life, saved only by Freya's intervention. But this was not the same path. In this altered thread of the world, Zelos existed, and with him came the resolve that no matter what, he would not allow his younger brother to die from an illness that could be managed, even if imperfectly. If that is your decision, father, then I will respect it, Zelos answered, keeping his voice calm and steady. I may not agree with it, but I will honor it. Kratos' stern face softened just slightly at those words. He gave a small nod, and for a rare moment, his lips curved into something resembling a smile, a brief recognition that his eldest son understood discipline, even when it conflicted with his own beliefs. Zelos raised his hand, and with a faint shimmer, the perfect cube began to contract. The walls of the white void rippled, folding inward until they collapsed into a single point of light. In the blink of an eye, Kratos and Zelos were once again standing in the familiar forest, the smell of pine and the sound of distant wind returning as if nothing had happened. To the world outside, not a second had passed. The conversation remained sealed within them, buried in silence. Kratos carried his decision forward, firm but heavy, while Zelos carried his own vow, to obey, yet to act in his own way to protect Atreus from the shadows of fate. 15 comments 0 vote. Chapter 8. World Tree. Zelos then continued living out his days much the same way as before, dedicating nearly every free moment he had to researching new applications of magic and creating spells to add to his arsenal, for that steadily was the only productive path he could truly take in his current life. Among the many branches of study that drew his attention, healing magic remained one of the most important, and so he pursued it with greater care than most of his other experiments. He was not satisfied with simply repairing the body in its present state, as most healing spells did. Instead, he wanted to refine the concept entirely by mixing it with the principles of time magic. His goal was to imitate the infamous healing ability of Kiru, who could restore an individual to their very peak condition. But Zelos had no interest in replicating the dangerous drawback that came with it, the erasure of memories, caused by forcefully reverting a target's body to a past self. That kind of healing would make someone lose not just their injuries, but also all the experiences and progress they had since made, which to Zelos was a flawed and incomplete method. So he began carefully combining the most basic incantations from the two different branches, traditional healing magic and the manipulation of time, layering them together, refining the pattern of mana flow again and again until he achieved a stable balance. What eventually emerged was a hybrid spell, a kind of reversal healing, which allowed him to heal someone by restoring them to their most optimal physicality, their peak self, without triggering the dangerous memory reset of a full-time reversal. Satisfied with his theory, he decided to put the spell into practice, and his first attempt was naturally directed at his own mother, Faye. Yet when Zelos invoked the spell upon her, something unexpected happened. A strange, unseen force interjected into the process, immediately dispelling his magic as though swatting aside an insect. He frowned, confused, for it was clearly not a defense born from giant magic, nor anything he had encountered before. What is this? Some sort of higher authority interfering. Could it even be something above the three sisters of fate themselves? Zelos thought silently, his mind racing as he glanced upward out of instinct, though of course there was nothing to be seen in the sky above him. Unwilling to let it go so easily, Zelos attempted the reversal healing once more, this time focusing his senses fully on the strange interference rather than the healing itself. As he did so, he felt the foreign energy push back against his magic again, but this time he reacted quickly, weaving a secondary spell to capture and contain a small fragment of the mysterious force. To his surprise, it offered no resistance once isolated, almost as if it wanted to be studied. What is going on here? Zelos muttered inwardly, baffled by what he had just collected. The sensation of it within his containment spell was unlike any kind of energy he had catalogued before. Before he could think further, a familiar voice broke his concentration. What is the matter, Zelos? Is something troubling you? Faye asked gently, having noticed her son's furrowed brow and the uncharacteristic hint of unease in his eyes. Turning toward her, Zelos did not dance around the subject. Mother, do you believe there is a higher power, something that oversees and controls the fate of every living being in this realm? He asked directly. Faye blinked in mild surprise, taken aback by the weight of his question, before a small smile tugged at her lips. There is not, she said after a moment. Every foreseeable future is born only from choices and actions. Those who claim to see the future can only perceive the likely paths that people may take, and from there they deduce the possible consequences. But there is no single thread of fate predetermined for all individuals. The lives we live are not dictated by some cosmic hand, only shaped by the consequences of our own decisions. Her words were calm and reassuring, but Zelos could not help but harbor doubt. He already knew that Faye herself had foreseen the great journey that Kratos and Atreus were destined to take, all the way to the time of Ragnarok. If she could see that far ahead with such certainty, then the line between choice and fate was far blurrier than she was willing to admit aloud. Still, he offered her a respectful nod. Thank you for your insightful answer, Mother, he said politely, even though inwardly he remained unconvinced. With that, he excused himself and stepped outside the cabin, turning his focus back toward the strange energy sample he had captured. Whatever it was, he knew he had to study it further, for it might hold answers beyond even what Faye was willing to speak. Zelos continued to study the strange energy he had collected for the following years, never letting it out of his sight, always running new experiments, and recording his observations in detail. Through countless trials, he eventually discovered that the energy carried a signature remarkably similar to the essence that flowed through the world tree itself. This discovery gave him a clearer direction, and he dedicated himself to developing a specialized magic that would allow him to perceive the energy directly instead of merely sensing fragments of it. When the spell was complete and activated, his surroundings shifted. For the first time, Zelos saw the world tree and its countless invisible branches spread across existence, weaving through the realms and attaching themselves to nearly every living being. The branches stretched outward endlessly, forming a massive network of connections that shaped the flow of fate itself. Yet one detail stood out. No branch was connected to him. He confirmed this by examining not only his own presence but also his eagle summons, and each time the result was the same, they carried no ties to the world tree. What caught him off guard even more was the fact that Kratos, despite not being a god native to this realm, still possessed his own branch, firmly anchored like the rest. So this explains why the giants are able to see the future, Zelos thought, carefully tracing the patterns of the branches. They must be reading these connections, following how each one shifts and interacts with others. By observing the flow of the branches, they can deduce the most likely outcomes and claim them as visions of fate. Wanting to test the extent of his new ability, Zelos decided to focus his sight on the branch tied to Faye. Immediately, a scene unfolded before him, her body being mourned by three figures, himself, Atreus, and Kratos. Afterward, her remains were carried and released in Jotunheim, returned to the land of her people. The vision was brief but heavy, confirming that her thread would inevitably end there. He then turned his gaze toward the branches of Atreus and Kratos. What he saw was familiar, almost unsettlingly so. Their futures revealed fragments of events he recognized, moments that aligned with the story of the god of war he had known before. Battles, journeys, tragedies, and the great clash of Ragnarok all appeared as if they were already etched into their destinies, waiting to unfold. Finally, Zelos released his focus and looked at himself once more. His earlier suspicion was correct, there was no branch. Nothing bound him to the world tree. So it's true, Zelos concluded silently, his thoughts calm but firm. I am fateless, unbound by the burdens of this world. My path is my own, beyond the threads of fate that control others. But before he could reflect further, his vision shifted again. Without warning, 5 glowing lights began to take form directly in front of him. They appeared gradually, pulsing with a strange rhythm, neither fully divine nor entirely magical, and their presence disturbed the balance of the space around him. If you enjoy this fanfic, please donate your power stones, it would really help out with my enthusiasm on writing. B.O. Bokoba Creators Thoughts. 20 comments 0 vote. Chapter 9. 5 Primordial Summons. As the blinding light slowly began to fade, 5 distinct orbs of different colors revealed themselves, floating steadily in front of Zelos. He immediately recognized them, for they were not foreign objects but creations of his own making. Each orb had been carefully forged years ago, imbued with the essence of 20 elemental trolls, and then left to absorb primordial essence from their respective elements for an extended period. Zelos had expected progress, but what stood before him exceeded those expectations. For 5 years of his personal time, the orbs had been silently working, yet based on the density of their energy and the purity of their aura, Zelos realized that the flow of time for them had been vastly different. What felt like 5 years to him was at least 100 years for the orbs themselves, perhaps even longer. Their power had matured beyond what he had planned, becoming pure vessels of elemental force. Excellent. This turned out even better than expected, Zelos thought, reaching out with his senses to feel the energy of each orb. Each one radiated strength so immense that they could easily serve as the foundation for a weapon, a summon, or even an artifact that transcended the normal laws of magic. Now, instead of simply wielding elemental energy, he possessed 5 primordial essences refined to their peak. With little hesitation, Zelos began the next stage of his work. He started a ritual that required a heavy price, not from others, but from himself. He cut off each of his own limbs one by one, aligning them with the elements he wished to bind. His right arm was sacrificed for fire, his left arm for water, his right leg for wind, his left leg for earth, and finally, his heart was offered for lightning. Each time he severed a part of himself, he immediately healed the wound with practiced ease. To him, the process was not as painful as it should have been, for he had long since mastered both his body and his healing magic. Using the blood from his removed limbs, Zelos carefully drew abyssal marks onto the ground, forming a vast ritual circle that pulsed with otherworldly energy. It was within this circle that he poured the orbs, his essence, and his willpower. His goal was simple but ambitious, to create 5 primordial demons, creatures that could serve both as independent summons and as weapons bound directly to his soul, much like the metal vessels from the Magi universe he remembered from his past life. The abyss responded. The ritual began to consume everything placed within its boundaries, producing streams of red liquid that devoured the space like living rivers. Slowly, shapes began to emerge. Their forms twisted and grew until they became complete beings, and as they manifested, names whispered themselves into Zelos's mind. His right arm became Ignis, a colossal, bipedal creature born of living rock and molten magma. His entire body resembled a walking volcano, obsidian armor cracked open to reveal lava churning beneath. His right arm was impossibly large, dragging along the ground, leaving a blazing trail wherever it touched. From his head jutted a single blazing horn, and a vertical furnace-slit glowed fiercely in place of a face. Steam and embers roared from him constantly, warping the air and melting stone wherever he walked. His left arm became Tethys, a serpentine leviathan, both fluid and solid. Her immense body was composed of deep ocean currents, swirling with glimpses of a glowing skeletal frame beneath. From her torso extended whip-like arms tipped with clawed fingers, each capable of lashing with the force of a tidal wave. Her lower half was a coiling tail of violent waters, constantly shifting and thrashing. Her face was eerily serene and mask-like, without eyes, framed by a mane of living kelp. A haunting hum resonated from her entire being, deep enough to fracture glass and disorient the mind. His right leg became Zephyros, a beastly avian humanoid shrouded in storm clouds and condensed air. His body was sleek and wiry, wings vast and tattered, spreading shadows across the land when unfurled. His talons could shred steel with ease, and his face was nothing but a swirling vortex of wind, drawing in air and light, crowned with faint sparks of lightning borrowed from Voltan's domain. He moved with impossible speed, each step producing sonic booms and ghostly afterimages. His voice was the deafening shriek of a hurricane tearing apart the skies. His left leg became Terra, less a beast and more a moving continent. She resembled a mountain brought to life, her body vast and quadrupedal, made of stone, crystal, and ancient ores. Moss, vines, and entire trees grew upon her back, giving her the appearance of a living landscape. Glowing mineral seams pulsed within her body like veins of power, and a single massive crystalline eye rested deep within her rocky crest. Each step she took shook the ground with unstoppable force, her presence a reminder of nature's slow but unyielding strength. Weapons could not harm her bulk, for she was endurance itself. Finally, his heart became Voltan, a dragon formed of pure lightning and light. His body was long, serpentine, and unstable, constantly shifting as arcs of electricity surged across his form. His wings resembled thunderclouds torn open by crackling veins of energy, and his roar was a sound that merged thunder and destruction in a single strike. He was no mere creature, but a living calamity, power moving at the speed of light, striking with enough force to rival a god's wrath. All 5 demons existed within their own perfect cubes, artificial spaces created by Zelos, appearing small from the outside but infinite within. Inside, their forms were fully realized, and Zelos could observe them as though watching through an enormous screen. Satisfied with their manifestation, Zelos transitioned them into artifact forms, so they could serve as weapons tied directly to him. Ignis condensed into a pair of arm guards, black and crimson with magma-like streaks across their surface. Tethys became a gauntlet, sleek and shimmering like flowing water, with traces of coral-like design. Zephyros shifted into a set of ethereal wings, reminiscent of the wings of Icarus once wielded by Kratos, though these could vanish into Zelos' body and reappear at will. Terra transformed into a full-body armor of dark obsidian, imposing and protective, resembling the armor of an ancient knight merged with nature's raw power. Lastly, Voltan condensed into a sword, elegant yet overwhelming, modeled in style after Levitane from the Fate series, but instead of fire, its edge crackled with lightning blasts far more potent than anything Zeus could summon. With the ritual complete, the artifacts embedded themselves directly into Zelos' soul and body. He felt no fear of them being stolen or separated, for each artifact was tied inseparably to his essence. With a mere thought, he could summon any of them, switching between weapon and summon form at will. For Zelos, this was more than a creation, it was the culmination of years of planning, a set of primordial companions and weapons that were now an extension of himself. 16 comments 0 vote. Chapter 10. Countdown. When Zelos finally came home, Faye greeted him in her usual calm manner, showing no difference in her tone or behavior, which reassured him that nothing suspicious had been noticed. Zelos quietly applied the anti-detection spell on the artifacts he had just forged and also dequipped them, allowing them to rest inside his soul. To his surprise, the artifacts were not dormant at all, they were still continuously absorbing primordial essence from the environment around them. This effect was not limited only to the artifacts themselves, for their activity also stimulated his own soul, forcing it to passively draw in traces of primordial essence as well, which in turn was making him stronger every passing minute. The only drawback he observed was that the rate of absorption was slower compared to when the orbs had been directly consuming primordial essence from their original sources. For the first time since arriving in the God of War universe, Zelos found himself with no immediate projects or goals to pursue. There were no experiments left undone and no urgent rituals waiting to be completed. Instead, he allowed himself to focus on cultivating his relationships with the people around him. He began spending more time with Atreus, sharing quiet moments with Faye, and continuing his sparring sessions with Kratos. This became his new daily rhythm, something far more grounded and simple than what he had lived through up until now. For once, Zelos decided he would take things slowly, at least for a while. Training Atreus became his main priority during this period, and unlike before, he began to push him at a much higher intensity. Archery was the central focus because Atreus was not yet permitted to accompany Kratos and Zelos on hunting trips, something that always bothered the boy and fueled his eagerness to improve. The more you repeat the same action, the closer you will come to perfecting it. Discipline in training is always more important than talent, and that is something you must never forget, Zelos explained, as Atreus struggled to hit fast-moving targets conjured by Zelos' magic. The targets darted unpredictably, and despite repeated attempts, Atreus missed nearly every shot. Frustration grew inside him until he finally snapped, smashing his bow against the ground in anger. Aghhhhhh. Atreus shouted, striking the dirt again and again, while Zelos simply watched, waiting for him to calm down. What is this? You lost your patience because you cannot accomplish something instantly. Zelos asked plainly, his words sharp enough to sting. This is impossible. No one could ever hit these kinds of targets, Atreus shot back angrily. Without saying anything further, Zelos raised his hand and shifted the same target Atreus had been aiming at. Only now, he increased its speed even further, so much so that the objects blurred out of sight completely, invisible to the naked eye. Though Atreus could no longer see them, he could still feel the disturbance in the air as they passed. Taking Atreus's bow in his hands, Zelos closed his eyes for a brief moment, steadying his breathing. He then opened them again with calm focus and began firing in rapid succession. Every arrow he loosed struck its mark. Each target froze mid-air when hit, one after another, until all of them hung motionless. Barely 5 seconds had passed before the exercise ended, and Atreus could only stare wide-eyed at the motionless targets and then back at his brother, utterly shocked. Never rely solely on your eyes to see. Calm your nerves, and use your other senses together with your instincts. Your eyes will not always be able to perceive your opponent. There will be times when you must listen to what your instincts tell you. Here, put this on, Zelos said, handing Atreus a blindfold. Atreus took it reluctantly, frowning. Why would I need a blindfold to learn how to aim? Doesn't that defeat the entire purpose? Just trust me and wear it. You want to become stronger, don't you? Then see this as your chance, Zelos replied, and though still unsure, Atreus accepted his words. Deep inside, he wanted to prove to his father that he was strong enough to stand beside him, so he tied the blindfold firmly around his eyes. Once Atreus was blindfolded, Zelos conjured a new set of moving targets. This time, however, he set them to actively attack Atreus, with the added assurance that he would heal the boy immediately after every strike. These targets will attack you directly. Defend yourself and fight back, Zelos instructed. Atreus looked confused, but prepared himself anyway. The training began, and within moments, Atreus was overwhelmed. The targets struck him again and again, each hit leaving him more frustrated and sore. He shouted in pain and annoyance, his complaints echoing between strikes. "Cut it out, this really hurts," Atreus yelled. "Would you rather feel the pain now, or would you rather die later because you failed to strike down a moving opponent?" Zelos countered coldly. His words silenced Atreus, who clenched his fists and tried harder to fight back despite the pain. Following his brother's earlier advice, Atreus attempted to calm himself and focus not on sight but on sound, movement, and instinct. Yet the targets continued to batter him, each strike shaking his concentration. The process was long and exhausting. For over 2 hours, Atreus endured this relentless training. He failed to hit even one target, but Zelos saw something worthwhile. Atreus was beginning to react. His body twitched slightly toward incoming strikes, his posture adjusting unconsciously to threats. Though small, these were the first signs of true instinct forming. Congratulations! You have just taken the first step on your journey toward becoming stronger. If you keep discipline and follow through, you will one day be able to hit even an enemy moving as fast as a raging blizzard, Zelos said. He then healed the bruises and aching body of Atreus, restoring him to health before ending the day's training. Meanwhile, above the hill, the figure of Kratos stood silently, watching his 2 sons train in the clearing below. His eyes stayed on Zelos for most of the time, and there was a faint satisfaction in his expression. Everything Zelos was teaching Atreus reflected the very lessons Kratos himself had once drilled into Zelos. Though he might not completely agree with pushing Atreus into such harsh methods at his young age, he could not deny that the message and discipline Zelos was instilling were sound. To Kratos, the foundation mattered more than the pace, and in this moment, he approved of what he saw. Beside him, Faye was also watching, her face calm but her eyes filled with approval as well. She could see Atreus struggling, but she also noticed the way Zelos guided him, firm but never cruel, demanding but not dismissive. It was a style that carried both the discipline of Kratos and the patience of her own teachings, a balance she rarely expected to witness. "It seems that you have managed to avoid what you once dreaded," Faye said quietly, her words carrying both comfort and meaning. Kratos grunted in response, a sound that for him was close to agreement. He did not need to say more, because Faye understood him, and his gaze remained fixed on his sons, the corner of his mouth tightening ever so slightly in what might have been pride. 14 comments 0 vote. Chapter 11. Observation Hockey. It has now been a full year since Zelos took over the direct training of Atreus, and during this time, Atreus' growth in skill and discipline has been advancing at a rapid pace. The more Zelos pushed him, the sharper Atreus became, and the results became clear in just the first month. Atreus, who once struggled to even graze a moving target, could now consistently land arrows on the fast-moving marks that Zelos set before him. Once this was achieved, Zelos gradually increased both the speed of the targets and their overall numbers, forcing Atreus to adapt, overwhelming him on purpose so that his limits would be tested and his natural talent forged into actual strength. Of course, archery was not the only focus of their training. Zelos also placed significant importance on close-quarters combat, sparring against Atreus regularly. He guided him into the style of a minimalist fighter, one who never wasted unnecessary movements, who built momentum slowly and carefully, while making sure each strike was compact rather than wild and overextended. Make sure that when you attack, you do not obsess over planning your very next move. Instead, secure your rhythm and allow your instincts to carry you. This way, if you ever face someone who can predict or even read your thoughts, they will not be able to easily see through your next strike, Zelos explained calmly, as he blocked and redirected Atreus' every attempt with ease, almost mocking the boy's predictable flow. His movements mirrored the same kind of effortless counters that Atreus would one day see in Heimdall. Yes, Atreus shouted with determination, only to be caught off balance and slammed hard into the ground. His stance had faltered, and Zelos waited patiently for him to stand again, showing no intention of letting the lesson end there. Practice was one thing, but to Zelos, real combat was another, and the only way for Atreus to prepare for it was through repetition and struggle. To bridge this gap, Zelos created a weekly exercise, summoning clay golems that would fight against Atreus. These golems were adjusted so their attributes perfectly matched Atreus' current level of strength and speed, ensuring a fair but merciless fight. They were not instructed to hold back. If they could wound Atreus, they would. If they could push him to the brink of death, they would. Zelos allowed it without hesitation, as he was always confident in his ability to heal Atreus before true death claimed him. And even if Atreus were to fall completely, Zelos was prepared to resurrect him, knowing it was not yet his time, and that the world tree itself would not interfere. This brutal approach led to Atreus experiencing multiple near-death encounters, each one forcing him to break through the walls of his former self. His reflexes sharpened, his knowledge from Zelos, lessons began to surface naturally in combat, and his ability to apply theory in practice grew more efficient. Pain was constant, but so too was progress. By the 6th month, Atreus began showing signs of grasping a power similar to observation hockey, as he could now strike moving targets with flawless accuracy, even those that Zelos manipulated with unpredictable speed and patterns. His shots became more efficient as well, no longer requiring him to pull back his bowstring as far to release a lethal arrow. At the same time, Atreus was beginning to understand the principle of instinctive fighting. Rather than letting his thoughts cloud him in battle, he trained to act on instinct alone, honing his body and experience so that when the time came, his instincts would make the correct decision without hesitation. During this same period, Zelos sought and gained Kratos' permission to allow Atreus to accompany them on hunts. This step was not for sport alone, but to provide Atreus with real experience in killing, not only beasts for food, but to prepare him for the possibility of striking down a person if it ever became necessary. Zelos knew, as Kratos did, that nothing was more dangerous than facing an enemy driven into a corner, and Atreus could not afford to be unprepared for that moment. Thus, the routine of their lives settled into a cycle. For the next 6 months, Zelos and Atreus trained tirelessly, hunted in the wilds, and returned to train once again. Every night, Zelos healed Atreus' bruises, cuts, and strains, making sure that by morning his body was ready to repeat the process all over again. Through this repetition, Atreus was not only hardening his body but also his mind, learning discipline in the face of monotony, and discovering that progress often lay hidden in the dull, repeated actions that most would abandon out of boredom. Of course, the entire year was not spent solely with Zelos training Atreus. In between their daily routines, Zelos also dedicated time to visiting and conversing with Mimir. Their exchanges often revolved around stories and knowledge, with Mimir always eager to share his experiences, and Zelos just as eager to listen. To Mimir, having someone who would lend an attentive ear was refreshing, while to Zelos, every tale was another piece of information that could one day prove useful. At the same time, Zelos continued to carefully examine the complex magical restraints that bound Mimir to the tree, studying the structure and composition of the spellwork Odin had cast upon him. Though he was still far from breaking it, Zelos considered it a long-term project worth investing time in. Outside of this, Zelos often experimented with creating simple but practical spells that, while not flashy, proved to be incredibly convenient. One such creation was the spell he named Deep Cleanse. Despite its name sounding questionable, its function was straightforward yet thorough. It removed dirt, germs, grime, and any substance that could be considered impure or unclean. With a single cast, everything within range would be spotless. Zelos and Faye both came to appreciate this spell greatly, as neither of them favored living in filth or dealing with the hassle of constant manual cleaning. In addition to these smaller projects, Zelos also began recreating various spells he had once seen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, specifically those used by Doctor Strange. He wanted to replicate their form and function, not only out of curiosity but also as a practical exercise in illusion and utility magic. These spells, with their focus on runes, sigils, and portals, provided him with useful tools that he could adapt to his own repertoire. Moreover, Zelos recognized the importance of maintaining appearances. If he were to venture beyond their home or encounter outsiders, projecting the image of a simple spellcaster, a talented one, perhaps, but nowhere near the level of Odin, who was known as the god of sorcery, would serve him well. Keeping others from realizing the true extent of his power was, in Zelos' mind, just as important as mastering new spells. 17 comments 0 vote. Chapter 12. End of an era. 2 more years had quietly passed since then, and Atreus had grown into a capable and strong young person, one who now moved with instinctual precision. His fighting style had developed to the point where he relied almost completely on his instincts, something similar in nature to the ultra-instincts that Zelos himself had once achieved in the past. The difference was that Atreus had been guided step by step into this state, while Zelos had forced his way into it, yet the result was still the same. Atreus was no longer just a boy swinging a bow, he was becoming a warrior in his own right. However, as Atreus grew stronger, Faye, on the other hand, seemed to weaken with each passing month, as though their strengths were somehow connected or balanced against one another. At first, her condition was subtle, nothing more than being short of breath after doing ordinary errands, the kind of thing that seemed minor and manageable. Zelos would often step in to help her, and for a time, that was enough. But soon the signs became harder to ignore. Her energy faded quickly, she struggled to stay on her feet, and within half a year she was no longer able to stand at all. Eventually, she became bedridden, her breathing so shallow that someone unaware might have mistaken her for already gone. Zelos poured himself into his craft, developing and experimenting with countless forms of healing magic, desperate to find something that would work. Yet, despite everything, nothing brought her even the slightest improvement. It became clearer to him that this was not an illness of the body, nor was it a simple injury that could be repaired. Instead, it resembled something spiritual, something akin to what Atreus once suffered when his spirit and his physical form struggled to align with one another. But unlike Atreus, Faye was not in conflict with who she was. She had long accepted her nature as a giantess, and her spirit did not resist it. That doesn't even make sense, Zelos thought in frustration, pacing at her bedside. His mind wrestled with his lack of progress. No matter how much he studied the issue, he felt no closer to the answer, and that gnawed at him deeply. If only I had the essence of healer, or at the very least the essence of mad doctor, I could fix this. I could save her. His thoughts circled bitterly as he looked at the frail figure of Faye lying before him. Her strength was almost gone, but her smile never faded. Even as her body weakened, she still looked at him with warmth and calm, which only made the weight on his chest heavier. What's wrong, my son? Faye asked in her usual gentle tone. Even with her shallow voice, there was comfort in it, and it pierced Zelos' heart. It's you, Zelos admitted bluntly, his frustration spilling out. There's something wrong with you, and I can't, for the life of me, figure out why. His words came without disguise, but Faye only smiled again, as if she had expected his honesty. Hadn't I told you before? Everyone's time comes eventually. Death is not something to fear. Her tone was calm, almost casual, as she tried to ease the burden she knew her son was carrying. With great effort, she tried to raise her hand, but it barely moved. Seeing this, Zelos gently took her hand and placed it against his face. The small gesture was enough to bring another faint smile to her lips. Protect your brother and your father, Faye continued softly, her words carrying the weight of a final request. I know you are strong, stronger than you may even realize, but remember this, do not try to carry every burden by yourself. Ask for help when you need it. That is not weakness, and it is not meant to be borne by you alone. It sounded less like advice and more like her last will, spoken directly to her eldest son. Afterward, Faye asked to speak with Atreus and Kratos separately, one by one. Zelos respected her wish and stepped out to call them in, finding them both waiting quietly outside the cabin. Atreus went in first, disappearing behind the door, and after a while, Kratos followed. Zelos did not try to overhear what was said inside, he knew this was something personal between them, something Faye wanted to share in private. When Kratos finally went in, Atreus came back out. The boy's eyes looked empty, like a flicker of light had been extinguished inside them. He simply stared forward, his face calm but drained of the usual spark. What are you thinking? Zelos asked quietly as he approached, studying his brother's expression. If even you can't heal mother, Atreus replied slowly, his voice level but heavy, do you think there's anyone out there who could? There is no one capable of knowing everything, Zelos answered after a pause. Those who claim they do are either lying or too foolish to understand their own ignorance. His words did not directly answer Atreus' question, yet they carried the truth as Zelos saw it. Atreus didn't argue or push further. He only turned to look at Zelos, and for the first time, he saw something he had never seen in his older brother's face before, an expression of helplessness and doubt. Until now, Zelos had always carried himself with certainty, as if he understood the world better than anyone else. But in this moment, even Zelos did not have an answer. The next day, Kratos, Zelos, and Atreus prepared for the funeral. Faye had passed away quietly in her sleep, her final moments peaceful. What gave them a small measure of comfort, despite the weight in their hearts, was that she had left the world with a smile on her face. She had been surrounded by those she loved, and by those who loved her in return, which was all she ever wanted. Kratos took it upon himself to wrap Faye's body in cloth, each motion steady and deliberate, as though the ritual itself was the only thing keeping him grounded. Zelos and Atreus assisted in silence, both following his lead, neither speaking unless necessary. The weight of the moment pressed on all of them, but none shed tears openly. It was not that they felt no grief, but that their grief was too deep for words. When the wrapping was finished, they began cutting down the trees that Faye herself had marked long ago. Kratos had promised her he would use those trees for her funeral, a promise he had thought distant at the time. He remembered the moment vividly, how he had once told her that the day was far off, that they had much time yet ahead. But now, standing in the forest and striking at the marked trunks with his axe, he realized that what he had believed to be a long time was, in truth, only a fleeting moment. In his eyes, their years together had passed as quickly as a breath. 19 comments 0 vote. Chapter 13. Stranger. Kratos was now kneeling before a tree with a golden marking etched into its trunk, his massive frame unusually still, as if the weight of memory pressed him down. He was trying, in his own quiet way, to say his farewells to his wife. Behind him, Atreus and Zelos stood together, watching in silence. Atreus wore a questioning look, his young face twisted with confusion, uncertain of what their father was doing. Zelos, however, understood and simply observed without a word. What is he doing? Atreus whispered, his voice low and careful, respectful even though he did not know the meaning behind Kratos' actions. He's saying goodbye to mother in his own way. Everyone faces grief differently. Not all will cry. Some choose silence. Some speak. Some act. For him, silence and action are the way, Zelos explained, his eyes fixed on Kratos. Is that why you're quiet too? Atreus asked, turning toward his older brother. Yes, Zelos answered plainly, without elaboration, his tone steady. That single word was enough for Atreus to understand that the conversation should end there. Both brothers then waited in silence as Kratos rose, raised the Leviathan axe, and began chopping into the marked tree. When the trunk finally gave way, Zelos stepped forward, lifted the wood, and stored it inside his personal space, his perfected storage magic, refined over years of practice. With the tree felled and prepared, the three of them left the grove. They walked together in silence, carrying their grief with them, until they reached the edge of the stream. Boarding a canoe, they allowed the water to carry them back to their home. When they arrived, Zelos drew the logs from his storage and placed them down, preparing the funeral pyre. It was what Faye had wished for. Weeks before her passing, she had spoken clearly. Her ashes were to be carried to the highest peak of all the realms. The three of them had promised to honor her request, and now they worked toward fulfilling it. Kratos entered the cabin and returned moments later carrying Faye's body, carefully wrapped in cloth. While he carried out this solemn task, Zelos finished preparing the pyre, arranging it with precision and care. This was no ordinary fire, it was a rite of passage in Norse tradition, meant to purify the body and help the soul find its way. I hope you find peace in the afterlife, mother. You are the only mother I have known in both of my lives. I wish there had been more I could do for you. I pray that your kin welcome you with open arms, because you deserve nothing less. Thank you for 15 years of my new life, for every moment, for every word. I swear, I will protect Father and Atreus. Rest knowing that. Perhaps one day I will see you again. Farewell, mother. Zelos thought to himself, his heart heavy as he watched Kratos bring the body forward and place it on the pyre. Zelos, Kratos said, his voice low but firm. No further words were needed. Zelos already knew what his father wanted. With a nod, he raised his hand and conjured a small flame, infused with the primordial fire he had mastered. He chose not to make it grand, but pure, a simple spark. Slowly, it drifted through the air until it touched the wood. The pyre caught, and soon flames consumed it, carrying Faye to the next life. May you rest in the fields of flowers you always longed for, Zelos said softly. Atreus and Kratos stood beside him, both watching in silence as the fire rose. No words were exchanged, but the quiet was enough. When the flames finally burned low and only ashes remained, Kratos carefully collected them, placing them inside a small brown pouch Faye had given him long ago. He held it for a long moment, looking between the pouch and his younger son, as if measuring the weight of both. The three of them returned inside the cabin afterward. The day had drained them, not of physical strength, but of spirit. The silence inside was heavy, and each carried their own thoughts in solitude. Then, without warning, Kratos stood. He looked directly at Atreus. Come, boy. I have a test for you, he said. His voice was steady, but there was a layer of intent that Atreus did not yet understand. Atreus blinked, confused by his father's sudden demand, while Zelos also rose from his seat. No, Zelos. This is between me and your brother. There is something I must be certain of, Kratos said firmly. Atreus's confusion only grew, for rarely did Kratos speak of separating them. We will return soon, Kratos added, leading Atreus toward the door. Zelos remained behind, watching them leave, understanding that Kratos intended to test whether Atreus was ready. For their mother's final request to be honored, Kratos needed to know his youngest son could endure the journey. As for Zelos, his strength was unquestioned. After more than 2 hours, both Atreus and Kratos finally returned to the cabin. Zelos was already waiting for them, lying casually on his bed. To pass the time, he had been creating small magical constructs in the shape of creatures, commanding them to act out scenes of his choosing. At that moment, he was entertaining himself by recreating the battle between Blackbeard and Law from the world of One Piece, watching it unfold as if he had his own private form of television. When the door opened, Zelos sat up slightly and observed them. Atreus walked in with a proud and satisfied look on his face, his chest held high, as though he had finally accomplished something meaningful. Kratos followed behind him, his usually stern expression softened by a glimmer of pride. He looked not only at Atreus but also at Zelos, and that one look was enough for Zelos to understand what had already been decided. Get ready, Kratos said, his deep voice steady but carrying weight. We are going to fulfill your mother's wishes. Zelos noticed that Kratos was splattered with blood, too much to be from any ordinary hunt. It wasn't animal blood. The shade and texture told him it had come from something, or someone, else. Kratos made a move to clean himself, but before he could, Zelos intervened. Cleanse, Zelos intoned, casting one of his personal spells upon Kratos. Instantly, the blood, dirt, and grime dissolved away, leaving his father's form spotless. He extended the spell to Atreus as well, cleansing him completely. This wasn't just an ordinary cleaning spell. Zelos had developed it after months of refinement, modifying it from a basic hygiene incantation into something far more thorough. Unlike the weaker version that Fern once used, Zelos's cleanse operated at a microscopic level, erasing every trace of dirt, bacteria, and impurity. It even left behind a fresh, natural scent, as though both Kratos and Atreus had just stepped out of a bath. Neither of them commented, but the effect was undeniable. Kratos's shoulders relaxed slightly, while Atreus sniffed at his own arm with a faint grin, clearly impressed at how effective it was. The three of them then began preparing for the journey, gathering supplies and equipping themselves for what was to come. But before they could finish, the sound of a knock suddenly echoed through the cabin door. The noise was sharp and deliberate, immediately breaking the silence of their preparations. All three froze for a moment. It was unusual. This cabin had never received visitors, not once, unless it was one of them returning from outside. There were only 3 people in this house, and they were all standing together at this moment. The knock was foreign, unexpected, and unwelcome. Kratos straightened, his body tense, his instincts instantly alert. His hand moved slightly toward the Leviathan axe, his expression hardening. This was the first time he had ever heard someone knock on their door in this world. Come out of hiding, a voice called from outside, loud and commanding. I know you're in there. The tone was confident, arrogant even. To Atreus, it was unknown. To Kratos, it was suspicious. But to Zelos, the sound was familiar. Recognition struck immediately. A grin spread across Zelos's face, unbidden and subconscious. He knew exactly who it was. Chapter 14. Kratos vs. Stranger. As Kratos heard the sudden knock echo against the cabin door, he immediately turned his head toward both of his sons. Zelos caught the meaning in Kratos's eyes instantly, reading the silent command with no hesitation. He raised his hand and cast a protective barrier around the entire house, a carefully layered spell designed so that nothing could destroy the structure from outside, while also ensuring that no one could enter without the family's permission. The magic sealed itself invisibly, humming faintly against the wood, unnoticed by Atreus but clearly felt by Kratos. With the cabin secured, Kratos stepped forward, his heavy footsteps pressing into the floorboards. He placed a hand on the door, then opened it slowly, leaving both Atreus and Zelos waiting inside, as he had decided to confront the visitor alone. The cold air rushed in as the door swung outward, revealing a lone figure standing outside. The man was thin and wiry, his pale skin covered with black tattoos that wound across his entire body. He wore almost no clothing, only a pair of short, crude coverings that barely concealed him. The stranger's piercing eyes immediately locked on Kratos. His expression shifted in interest as he inspected him, tilting his head slightly. Kratos did not return a word. Instead, he stepped fully outside and shut the door firmly behind him. Inside, Atreus waited nervously while Zelos, through his eagle summons, circling the cabin, observed every movement. His birds provided him with an unbroken view, and with their shared vision, Zelos studied the magical currents flowing through the stranger's body. The intricate spellwork embedded into his veins confirmed what he suspected. This was Baldur. Finally, a spell worth my time, Zelos thought with a faint grin forming. I've been getting bored with simple tricks. His immortality is fascinating. I'll take it apart, improve it, and erase the flaws that keep him from feeling. Outside, the silence between the two gods stretched. Kratos and Baldur stood face to face, each sizing up the other. Kratos was cautious, his eyes cold and unreadable, while Baldur was relaxed, brimming with arrogance, relying entirely on the invulnerability that had carried him for centuries. I thought you'd be bigger, Baldur finally said, his voice sharp yet amused. But you're definitely the one. Long way from home, aren't you? What do you want? Kratos asked bluntly, his voice carrying no emotion. Oh, you already know the answer, Baldur replied, his tone filled with disdain and misplaced confidence. Whatever it is you seek, you won't find it here, Kratos said, turning slightly as though to re-enter the cabin. Move on. Baldur laughed harshly, his voice echoing through the trees. Ha ha ha. And here I thought your kind was supposed to be enlightened. So much better than us. So much wiser. And yet here you are, hiding out in the woods like some coward. Kratos paused, then turned back to face him fully. He stepped forward, towering over Baldur. You don't want this fight. Oh, I'm pretty sure I do, Baldur smirked, before driving his fist directly into Kratos' jaw. The blow landed cleanly, but Kratos did not move, not even acknowledging the strike. Leave my home. Kratos roared, his patience breaking as anger crept into his face. Oh, you'll have to kill me for that, Baldur shot back. He struck again, punching Kratos several times in rapid succession. Kratos absorbed every blow, unmoving, until he caught Baldur's fist midswing. With a sharp twist and a counterpunch of his own, Kratos launched Baldur backward, his body crashing hard against the frozen ground. No, 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 Baldur muttered rapidly, his voice twitching, repeating the word like a mantra as he scrambled back up. I warned you several times, Kratos said coldly as he advanced. You are not listening. He reached down, grabbing Baldur by the arm and lifting him from the dirt with one hand. Fine, Baldur hissed, grinning as if enjoying himself. My turn. His fist slammed into Kratos' chest with immense force, sending the Spartan flying back across the yard. Baldur leapt forward instantly to follow, pressing the attack. You're disappointing, Baldur mocked, his voice carrying a strange amusement. I expected more. Show me more. The battle escalated, each clash of fist, shield, and axe shaking the ground beneath them. Kratos swung the Leviathan axe with precision, cleaving into Baldur's flesh, yet the god's face never changed. His wounds sealed as quickly as they opened, and there was no sign of pain. Baldur retaliated with brutal punches, hammering against Kratos' shield. Each strike resonated like thunder. Kratos slammed the axe against Baldur's head, forcing him down, but Baldur only answered with a powerful uppercut, launching Kratos high into the air. His body smashed through the roof of the cabin. As Baldur followed, he paused briefly when he noticed something strange. Through the broken hole, the cabin's interior was invisible. Instead of wood, furniture, or firelight, there was only a flat white glow, a blank emptiness concealing everything inside. Huh, that's new. What is that? Baldur muttered, momentarily distracted. Kratos seized the chance, striking with a sudden punch, seizing Baldur by the arm, and hurling him down to the ground in front of the cabin. Kratos followed quickly, landing atop Baldur and unleashing a storm of fists. Each blow was heavy, deliberate, cracking the dirt beneath them, yet Baldur's expression remained maddeningly unchanged. Finally, Baldur caught one of Kratos' fists and shoved him off, rising to his feet. His body was bloodied, yet within moments, the flesh sealed, the blood vanished, and he stood as though nothing had happened. Zelos, still watching through his summons, felt his excitement grow. This was exactly the kind of magic he had wanted to see. Ha 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 ha. Baldur laughed, stretching his arms wide. If you had simply told me what I wanted, this could have ended already. But no, you just had to be prideful. Now, I'll kill you, and after that, I'll walk into that cabin and see for myself what that mysterious light really is. Baldur readied himself again, and Kratos lowered into his stance, axe in hand. The fight was about to resume, and both gods were prepared for another clash. But before they could strike, the sound of creaking wood broke through the silence. The cabin door slowly opened. A figure stepped out calmly into the snow. Zelos emerged, walking toward the two warriors as though he had been waiting for this exact moment. Gentlemen, he said with a faint smile, his tone steady and casual. Let's get ready to rumble. Balder turned his head, curiosity flashing across his face. Kratos, however, did not react. He remained silent, for he knew his son's capabilities better than anyone. If you enjoyed reading my FIC so far, consider buying me a cup of coffee. B.O. Bokoba Creators Thoughts. 19 comments 0 vote. Chapter 15. Balder vs. Kratos and Zelos. The very first spell Zelos cast was directed at his father. A pale light washed over Kratos' battered body, knitting wounds closed and erasing the damage left by Balder's relentless blows. Kratos straightened, his body visibly recovering in moments. The change was not lost on Balder, who narrowed his eyes. The sensation of watching another heal almost mirrored the curse that bound him. You don't have the monopoly on healing, Zelos said evenly. With a sharp gesture, he enchanted his spell with infinity, layering it so that it would automatically trigger every time Kratos suffered harm. I can keep this up for eternity. Balder's smile faded slightly, and he turned his focus to Zelos. Seeing only a young sorcerer, he thought to exploit weakness, Zelos looked like the least threatening of the three. He lunged at him with reckless confidence. But Zelos was ready. A glowing magic circle flared into existence before him, shimmering like the arcane shields of Doctor Strange, intercepting Balder's strike. The impact cracked across its surface, but the barrier held firm. In the same instant, Kratos swung his Leviathan axe, catching Balder across the side and driving him back several steps. It still did nothing. Balder shook off the blow, his face smug and unchanging. No matter what tricks you use, I won't be beaten by the likes of you. Don't you get it? I can't feel any of this. He laughed, seizing the cold from the axe's magic and hurling it outward in a wave of ice. The blast never landed. Zelos created a vacuum with a flick of his hand, swallowing the icy explosion into nothingness. So, you're immune to damage, physical and magical alike? Zelos asked aloud, tilting his head. He suddenly lunged forward and kicked Balder across the jaw. The impact knocked Balder backward, more from surprise than pain. You're Balder, aren't you? Zelos continued calmly, stepping to Kratos' side. His father moved subtly between them, instinctively shielding him despite Zelos' power. Balder, however, was already back on his feet, his smile widening. Glad to see my reputation has spread, even here in the woods. But it makes no difference. They say you're untouchable, Zelos replied. Immune to all harm, mortal or divine. That makes you the perfect target practice. He snapped his fingers, and the air shimmered. Dozens of clones appeared around them, each one forming glowing whips of magic. In unison, they lashed out at Balder, not to hurt him, but to bind him. The glowing coils wrapped around his limbs, slowing his movements. Kratos wasted no time, striking hard with the axe while Balder was restrained. At the same time, Zelos' true self conjured a massive spell circle above, one that glowed with the condensed runes of his Zoltrak spell. Bolts of destructive energy rained down, marking Balder with faint sigils that locked onto him like beacons. Balder snarled, breaking free of the restraints with a violent surge of strength, but Kratos was already upon him. Axe swings and shield strikes kept him occupied while Zelos' spells pounded at him from every direction. The air shimmered with hundreds of blasts per second, forcing Balder to fight under relentless pressure. Enough! Balder roared, slamming his fists outward in a burst of raw force. Kratos blocked with his shield, absorbing the brunt, and used the momentum to pivot behind Balder. With a twist of skill, Kratos forced him to stand exposed. Ray of disintegration. Zelos shouted, his voice clear over the chaos. From the massive circle above, a searing beam of light erupted, pure and destructive. Kratos leapt clear at the last second. The beam carved through Balder, cutting him clean in half, and continued through the mountain behind him, splitting stone and snow in an earth-shaking explosion. When the dust settled, Balder's upper half twitched on the ground, staring at Zelos in shock. For the first time in centuries, his body had been damaged in a way his curse did not immediately erase. Don't worry, Zelos said calmly, approaching as his eyes studied the wound. Your spell is still working. But here, so you don't bother us right away. He extended his hand, casting time magic over the torn flesh. The flow of healing slowed a millionfold, freezing the regeneration mid-process. Baldur would still never die, never truly feel, but his body would take an eternity to recover. By, son of Odin. Zelos flicked his wrist. A surge of wind magic wrapped around Baldur's half-regenerating body and hurled him skyward, flinging him far into the distance. One of Zelos' eagles immediately followed to keep track of him. Zelos exhaled, lowering his hand. Kratos was already watching him, his expression heavy with thought. How did you know who he was? Kratos asked. Mother, Zelos answered simply. They turned back toward the cabin together. Will he return? Kratos asked after a moment. Yes, Zelos said bluntly, his tone leaving no room for doubt. As father and son walked back toward the cabin, their eyes were drawn to the aftermath of the battle. Entire sections of the forest had been uprooted or scorched, trees split apart, and the ground itself torn and shattered. For Kratos, the sight struck deeper than mere destruction. It was the forest he had walked through countless times with Faye, the quiet place where they had shared years of peace. Now, much of it looked ruined, a battlefield scarred by violence. Repair, Zelos muttered. As he walked, faint circles of magic spiraled outward from his steps, releasing waves of restoration. Splintered bark reformed into living wood, toppled trees stitched themselves upright, and the earth sealed its cracks as if time itself was being rewound. Slowly, the forest began to return to what it had been, untouched and whole. Kratos observed the process. How far has your magic come? He asked at last. His tone carried no judgment, only the weight of genuine curiosity. He had long lost the ability to measure Zelos' strength and could no longer tell where his limits lay. Zelos did not hesitate. I believe that if I willed it, I could kill you, father. His voice was calm, stripped of arrogance. It was not a boast, not a challenge, simply a fact spoken with absolute certainty. Kratos regarded him with a knowing gaze. He could recognize empty pride when he heard it, but Zelos' words were not laced with pride. They were true, plain, and unshaken. For a long moment, Kratos said nothing more, silently accepting the reality of his son's statement. By the time they reached the cabin, the forest around them looked untouched by conflict. Zelos deactivated the shimmering cube of protection he had cast earlier, and the illusion fell away to reveal Atreus waiting near the door. The boy looked anxious, his face carrying the strain of everything he had witnessed and overheard. The three of them resumed their preparations in silence. Atreus busied himself by checking their supplies, though his nervous glances toward Kratos and Zelos betrayed his worry. Zelos, on the other hand, had already stored what he needed inside his personal space, pulling out small items only when necessary. After nearly 10 minutes, Kratos finally spoke, his voice low and steady. Are you both ready? Atreus straightened and nodded quickly. Zelos gave a single nod of agreement as well. Then we go, Kratos said. With no more words, the three of them stepped out together, beginning their journey to fulfill Faye's final wish, to spread her ashes from the highest peak across all the realms. 37 comments 0 vote. Chapter 16. To the mountains. As Zelos, Atreus, and Kratos began their journey, the boy found his gaze wandering. The restored forest stretched around them in quiet beauty, every tree whole, every patch of earth unscarred, as if no battle had ever taken place. Atreus took it all in with wide eyes, and though both Kratos and Zelos noticed his lingering looks, neither spoke. There was no danger in curiosity, and nothing that required their concern. Up to the mountains, huh? It's gonna be a long journey, Atreus finally said, breaking the silence that had begun to settle uncomfortably over them. Yes, Kratos answered, his tone steady. But it is an important one. Zelos nodded in agreement. A faint sense of excitement stirred in him. This was the beginning of their adventure, the path Faye had set for them. He could not help but feel eager for what lay ahead. For a while, their footsteps were the only sound. Then Atreus, remembering the stranger who had appeared at their home, spoke again. Father, Zelos, who was that man earlier? The one who attacked us. Nothing important, Kratos said curtly. Focus on the path ahead. Not the past. His voice carried the same edge it always did when the subject of gods lingered too close. He had no wish to speak of the stranger, and even less desire to burden Atreus with names. Yeah, don't worry about it, Atreus, Zelos added, keeping his eyes forward. The only important thing is that he's gone, and won't be bothering us anytime soon. Atreus froze in his tracks. His expression shifted from curiosity to shock, then to unease. Kratos and Zelos both noticed immediately and turned back toward him. Did the two of you kill him? Atreus asked. His voice wavered, caught between accusation and fear. We did what had to be done, Kratos said. His reply was sharp, heavy with finality. He fixed his son with a gaze so intense that Atreus nearly shrank under it. Animals I can understand, Atreus said hesitantly. We hunt them for food. Draugr too, they're already dead. But people, they're just trying to survive. Zelos let out a short chuckle, the sound breaking the tense air. Both Atreus and Kratos looked at him, confused. Why do you laugh? Kratos asked. I just find it funny that Atreus didn't realize he already answered his own question, Zelos replied, his tone even. What? Atreus asked, frowning. You said it yourself. They're trying to survive, too. And so are we. That's the natural order of life. One side survives, the other doesn't. It's not about fairness. It's about survival. Always remember that. Atreus looked down, absorbing the words. Kratos' gaze softened slightly as he turned back to his son. Zelos is correct, Kratos said. On this journey, we will face many creatures. Do not expect mercy from them, and do not waste your heart on them. They will not open theirs for you. Atreus nodded, though his face was still conflicted. I understand, father. Zelos. I'll close my heart to it. Zelos shook his head. No. Don't close your heart. That's where father and I differ. Instead, understand it. Understand their desperation, their reasons. Use that knowledge as fuel when you're in their place. Adapt. Survive. That's the true lesson. His words lingered in the air, leaving both Kratos and Atreus silent. Neither argued, but neither confirmed either. Before the conversation could continue, the air around them shimmered as Draugr began to materialize, clawing their way out of the earth. At once, Kratos took the front line, shield and axe ready. Atreus kept to his lessons, drawing his bow and firing at targets Kratos could not reach. Zelos stood apart, calmly raising a hand. White beams of light, sharp and instantaneous, pierced through Draugr one after another. Zoltrak, his favored spell, cut through them effortlessly, dismantling the creatures in bursts of smoke and ash. Within minutes, the fight was over. The Draugr lay defeated, their teamwork seamless, Kratos the unyielding fighter, Atreus the sharp-eyed support, and Zelos the overwhelming mage. Together, they continued on until they reached the base of a steep wall of rock. Up, Kratos commanded, crouching so Atreus could climb onto his back. He prepared to scale the wall the hard way. But Zelos raised a hand. Father, I can fly us up there. Kratos paused, then stepped down from the rock face, Atreus still clinging to him. Without waiting for further discussion, Zelos spread a spell into the air. Float, he intoned. A gentle current of magic wrapped around the three of them, lifting their bodies upward. Atreus' eyes widened in wonder as the ground shrank beneath them. Father, we're flying, he said with excitement, turning his head in every direction to take in the view. Kratos gave no reaction, his expression unchanged. To him, such magic was nothing new, nothing worth awe. Zelos, watching silently, knew why. He had played through every part of Kratos' journey, from Ghost of Sparta to Ragnarok, long before finding himself in this world. In seconds, they reached the mouth of a cavern carved into the mountain. Zelos released the spell, and their feet touched solid ground again. Without a word, the three of them pressed forward into the cave's darkened passageways, the first steps of their true journey now underway. Inside the cave, their path was anything but quiet. Draugr appeared in scattered groups, their hollow cries echoing off the stone walls as they shambled forward. Kratos cleaved through them with his axe, Atreus loosed arrows from behind, and Zelos dispatched them with precise bursts of magic, white beams of Zoltrak cutting through the darkness like lightning bolts. Between battles, they encountered broken bridges, collapsed ledges, and unstable ground that should have slowed them down. But with Zelos present, there was little challenge. He lifted them effortlessly over every obstacle with a flick of his hand, each float spell carrying them higher into the cavern's winding system. As they rose through a jagged opening, Atreus broke the silence. Father, do you think we'll see others on the road? His voice carried curiosity more than concern. Yes, Kratos answered bluntly, not looking back. Atreus tilted his head. Do you think they'll be friendly? No. The reply was just as flat, shutting the thought down before it could grow. Zelos glanced at his younger brother, then smirked faintly. Don't be so dismissive, father. The world isn't filled only with enemies. We'll meet others who are friendly, and we'll meet many different kinds of people along the road. Atreus smiled at that, reassured. Kratos did not respond, but the way his shoulders tightened showed he had heard the words. Their ascent continued until the cavern opened up to daylight. Stepping out, they found themselves standing on a high cliff, the wind brushing against them as they looked down. Below stretched the entire forest where their cabin lay hidden, bathed in sunlight and shadow. Wow, Zelos murmured, unable to help himself as he took in the view. The vast green expanse looked both fragile and eternal from above. Atreus, however, narrowed his eyes, his attention caught by something in the distance. Look, father. All this time we've had the stave protecting the forest, but there's a break there. Did you cut it? Kratos' gaze followed his son's, settling on the broken line where the protection ended. His expression shifted, subtle but troubled. Those trees were the ones your mother chose. She wanted them for her pyre. Atreus frowned, still studying the gap. Why do you think she did that? I don't know, Kratos said simply, though his tone carried weight. He did not like not knowing. Atreus tried again, his voice quieter now. How long do you think it will take before we reach the mountains? Do you think, before winter? I don't know, Kratos repeated. His eyes lingered on the broken stave, the question gnawing at him in silence. Why would Faye, who guarded them so carefully, leave such an opening? Zelos remained silent through it all. He knew the truth, or at least enough of it, but he had no intention of revealing it now. Some answers were not his to give. Finally, Kratos straightened and turned away from the cliff. Come. No looking back now. The three of them moved forward, leaving behind the safety of the forest and stepping fully into the journey that awaited them. 28 comments 0 vote. Chapter 17. Wildwood's Edge. The three then rested on top of the mountain, as the sun had already set. It was something that was not apparent in the game itself, but in reality, Kratos and Atreus had spent far more time before they could finish the quest, with hours passing by while they explored, fought, and solved the challenges laid before them. There was also the matter of time being different between the realms they traveled, which stretched the journey even longer. At one point, both Kratos and Atreus were even trapped in Helheim, a place that could be described as this version of hell, with Zelos helping them escape faster than what was possible in the original journey. That night, they gathered around a small campfire that Zelos had created with a flick of his magic. Atreus had been asking Kratos questions for some time now, curious about his father's past travels and adventures, but Kratos had remained silent. When he did speak, his answers were short, often a single word, and the awkward atmosphere grew heavier. Zelos, watching Atreus' growing frustration, finally decided to step in. He felt bad for the boy, and the silence was dragging on too long. Let me tell you my stories about my eagle's travels, Zelos then said, which immediately made both Kratos and Atreus turn their heads toward him, confused, as it was the first time they had heard anything about this. What? Kratos asked, his deep voice carrying suspicion. Well, I have summoned eagles before. Like this, Zelos answered, raising his hand. In response, numerous eagles appeared, circling overhead, their wings beating softly against the night air. Alongside them, a smaller number of owls materialized, their sharp eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. One owl landed gently on Atreus' shoulder, while an eagle descended and perched heavily on Kratos' leg. When Kratos looked at the eagle summoned by Zelos, he couldn't help but be reminded of the eagle that once took his godly essence away. For a moment, he stared directly into the bird's unblinking eyes. The eagle looked back at him, and Kratos held the gaze longer than he intended. After a few minutes, the eagle finally spread its wings and took off into the dark sky. Meanwhile, the owl perched on Atreus' shoulder hooted softly, as if speaking to him. Atreus, being naturally attuned to animals, could sense and understand the presence of the owl in a way that felt strangely natural. Those are my summons. They allow me to see more than what my own eyes can reach, Zelos explained, as the owl eventually fluttered off, vanishing back into him like a dissolving shadow. Why do you need to see more? Kratos then asked, his voice low but firm. It is the only thing I could do, Zelos replied with a somber tone. He began telling them how the eagles had once been his source of distraction when Faye had been sick long before, and how he had even tried to use them to search for a solution that could save her. Of course, as the three of them knew, it had failed. Zelos' reasoning was not a lie, but neither was it the entire truth. It was an answer that concealed more than it revealed. After his words, silence returned to the group. Both Atreus and Kratos stopped their questions, and the night became quiet except for the crackle of fire and the sound of wind brushing against the mountain rocks. They ate their simple meal and, after some time, lay down to rest. The next morning came quickly, and they immediately set out once again, making their way down the mountain. This time, however, Kratos made it clear that there would be no use of magic for assistance, his stern tone showing his disapproval of Zelos' reliance on spells during the previous night. After several hours of traveling on foot, they reached the edge of the wildwood. Before they could continue further, all three stopped at the sight in front of them. Spread across the clearing were countless statues, at least 1,000 or more, each one a Draugr, frozen in a petrified state. The sheer number was enough to make Atreus freeze in place. Draugrs, so many Draugrs. Are you sure we want to walk forward? Atreus said nervously, his bow trembling slightly in his hands. Kratos did not answer right away, instead scanning the area carefully, his eyes narrowing as he studied the frozen army. Can you defeat all of them? Kratos finally asked, turning his head slightly toward Zelos. Zelos nodded without hesitation. Then we move forward, Kratos declared, stepping boldly closer to the statues, each heavy footstep echoing in the tense silence. As they drew nearer, a loud cracking sound broke the air. The hardened dirt and stone that encased the Draugrs' bodies began to split and fall away. One by one, the Draugrs started to awaken, and the noise of thousands of shells breaking open was like a chorus of rattling bones that filled the wildwood. Before the Draugrs could swarm them, Zelos moved first. He summoned an earth golem directly in front of them, its body rising from the ground with heavy thuds. For the first time, Zelos tapped into a small essence of primordial magic, making the golem sturdier and stronger than anything he had created before. As the creature roared, it immediately charged into the Draugr army, crushing the first wave with raw force. Zelos raised his hand again, firing off multiple Zoltrak beams, each one piercing Draugr mages and magic users before they could finish their own spells. Meanwhile, Kratos rushed forward with his axe in hand, cutting down those in his path, while Atreus supported from behind with well-placed arrows. The battle began, the three of them moving as one, facing the overwhelming horde without hesitation. By the second, more and more Draugrs began to fall, their bodies being destroyed almost instantly. The plasma-like state of the Zoltrak beams was merciless, each shot vaporizing several Draugrs at once, leaving behind nothing but smoke and ash. Zelos continued firing relentlessly, his pace unbroken, as if the spell had become second nature to him. Every blast carved open the battlefield, thinning the horde that threatened to overwhelm them. At the same time, the earth golem roared as it moved through the crowd of undead. Its massive fist smashed into Draugrs without pause, crushing bones and shattering armor with every strike. Whenever one of the Draugrs tried to reform or crawl back up, the golem simply stomped down, grinding them into the dirt. The ground shook with each of its movements, and the creature acted like an unstoppable wall that shielded Kratos, Atreus, and Zelos from being surrounded. Meanwhile, Kratos and Atreus pushed forward with their own rhythm. Kratos swung the Leviathan axe with brutal efficiency, cleaving Draugrs in half with every strike. Each time his axe connected, frost spread across the bodies of the undead, freezing and cracking them before they shattered into fragments. Atreus stayed close behind, firing arrows into the weak points Kratos left exposed. His shots were sharp and precise, piercing through eyes, joints, and skulls, making it easier for Kratos to finish the job. Together, the four, the father, the son, the mage, and the golem, spread the Draugrs, numbers thin, breaking the once overwhelming horde into scattered groups. The battlefield that had looked hopeless at first was now turning in their favor, every second reducing the enemy further. 29 comments 0 vote. Chapter 18. Ruins. Numerous Draugrs were struck down by Atreus' arrows and the sharp, freezing blows of Kratos' Leviathan axe, their bodies collapsing into dust and ash. Yet, the one causing the most visible destruction was not either of them, it was the towering golem that Zelos had summoned. The creature, made of solid earth and rock, could decimate dozens of Draugrs in a single movement. With a single gesture from Zelos, it controlled the very ground the Draugrs stood upon, summoning spikes of stone that impaled them, or raising thick walls of rock that crushed them when it rammed them into each other. At times, it shaped weapons out of boulders, swinging them like hammers to flatten anything that approached. Still, even with the golem's overwhelming strength, the one who held the highest number of kills was Zelos himself. His Zoltrak shots were fired with precise control, piercing through rows of Draugrs at once, disintegrating them before they even had the chance to scream. Compared to him, Kratos and Atreus together could barely keep up in numbers. Every few seconds, another blast of light tore through the undead ranks, vaporizing both their armor and their rotting flesh in an instant. The more Zelos used the Zoltrak, the more natural it felt to him, its rhythm, its density, and even the way it curved through the air. His years of experience made him more comfortable with the technique, and with that familiarity came deeper control. He realized that if he focused enough, he could adjust the Zoltrak's size and intensity, making it as small as a pin or as large as a spear of light. He could even make it thread through specific targets, hitting each part he intended. After more than 10 minutes of what seemed like a relentless game of extermination, Zelos finally decided to end it. He gathered energy into his hands, forming a bright, pure light, not one meant to harm the living, but rather to cleanse the unnatural. He whispered softly, his voice steady. Turn undead. The light expanded, covering the battlefield like a wave. It was a spell Zelos had once copied from the magical arsenal of Konosuba, a technique meant to purify any creature of undead nature regardless of its origin. The results were immediate. Every Draugr that came into contact with the light disintegrated instantly, reduced to nothing more than faint ashes carried by the wind. Even when Kratos and Atreus were caught within its range, nothing happened to them, as the spell recognized their living essence. Once the last flicker of magic settled, Zelos waved his hand, and the golem turned back into pure energy, flowing into a circular seal on the ground before disappearing completely. He stored it away inside his magic circle, ensuring that he could summon it again in the future without needing to recast the full spell. Atreus looked at the now empty battlefield and frowned slightly, his voice filled with a mix of frustration and curiosity. Couldn't you have done that from the very beginning? Why wait until the end? Zelos smiled faintly at his question. How would you enjoy the adventure without facing the challenges that come with it? Don't you also want to grow stronger on your own? Atreus opened his mouth to argue, but before he could say anything further, Kratos spoke in his usual calm yet firm tone. Enough. Let's continue. Both Zelos and Atreus nodded, and the three resumed their path deeper into the wildwood. As they walked, Zelos quickened his pace slightly until he was beside Kratos. He could feel the quiet disapproval lingering in his father's silence, the same feeling that had been present ever since he began showing parts of his magic. Zelos knew Kratos disliked secrets, especially from those closest to him. Father, Zelos whispered, his tone careful and respectful, I would like to apologize if you feel offended that I keep certain parts of my magic secret. Kratos glanced at him briefly, his expression unreadable. That is not my concern, he replied after a short silence. It is not the magic itself that troubles me. It simply reminded me of something I wished to forget. It no longer matters. Zelos nodded. Even so, I apologize, father. Kratos only grunted in response, a short, low sound that meant both acknowledgement and acceptance. With that, the matter was closed, and the three of them continued walking until they arrived at a mural etched into an ancient stone wall. Father, Atreus said as he examined the carving closely, it says here there's a giant settlement further up ahead. Kratos looked at him with mild surprise. You can read the language of the giants. Some of it, Atreus replied proudly. Just what mother taught me. But the words all connect somehow, so sometimes I can figure out meanings I'm not supposed to know. It's kind of like guessing, but it feels right, you know. Kratos gave a small nod. He turned to Zelos, who also nodded silently. Zelos could read the language fluently. More than that, he could even speak the ancient, obscure tongue used by the world serpent, knowledge he had gained from Mimir's teachings. Still, he kept that to himself, not seeing the need to mention it now. After a few more minutes of walking, they reached what remained of the giant settlement. It was nothing more than ruins, collapsed walls, half-buried statues, and the remnants of a once great civilization that had long vanished from Midgard. The sight wasn't surprising, as all the giants were gone, save for the world serpent and two others, one unaware of his true identity, and the other choosing never to speak of it. The three then began their climb up the mountain. Zelos, now permitted to use his floating magic, ascended easily, his movements smooth and effortless compared to Kratos and Atreus, who relied on their strength and agility to scale the steep rocks. Along the way, they encountered another group of Draugrs, fewer in number but significantly faster and more coordinated than the previous ones. The trio dispatched them quickly and continued onward until they reached a narrow bridge overlooking a deep ravine. Atreus' eyes lit up with excitement when he saw the mountain peak so close ahead. Without thinking, he dashed across the bridge, eager to reach it first. Zelos, already aware of what would happen, acted before anything could go wrong. He used his magic to stop Atreus mid-step, floating him safely back to their side. Careful, Zelos warned, his tone calm. Not everything is as it seems. Kratos followed up immediately, his voice low but stern. Your haste will cost us. Be patient. Atreus looked down, disappointed, embarrassed that both of them had to correct him at once. Zelos then extended his hand and used his floating magic to carry all three of them across the ravine safely. But just as they were about to continue forward, Atreus suddenly froze, his face pale. Father, Mother's knife, it's missing. Atreus said, panic in his voice. Kratos turned toward him. If it is gone, then it is gone. There is nothing we can do. He began walking forward again, but Atreus refused to listen. He ran back toward the cliffside, looking down, trying to spot where the knife might have fallen. Zelos stood silently, watching him with mild concern. Enough, Atreus. It's lost, Kratos said, but Atreus ignored him. Instead, he did something foolish. He jumped down from the ledge, reaching for the lower cliff. Zelos reacted instantly, catching him mid-air with his floating spell and preventing him from falling. Let me, Atreus insisted, his voice steady despite his reckless action. I'll just find Mother's knife. Zelos looked toward Kratos for guidance. Kratos met his gaze and gave a slow, approving nod. Without a word, Zelos floated both Atreus and Kratos safely down to the bottom of the ravine. As soon as they landed, Atreus began searching through the rocks and debris, determined to find the knife that meant so much to him, a small yet irreplaceable piece of his mother. Meanwhile, Zelos' attention wandered to the ruins scattered across the bottom of the ravine. There were remnants of ancient statues and broken pillars, traces of civilizations long forgotten. The air felt thick, filled with the silent echoes of the past, and Zelos quietly observed it all, his expression unreadable. 41 comments 0 vote. Chapter 19. Blue Dwarf. Atreus searched the ground carefully, his eyes scanning every shadow and stone for any sign of his missing knife, while Kratos and Zelos kept watch nearby. The two of them stood alert, observing their surroundings with caution, as the ruins around them seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Broken pillars, collapsed archways, and remnants of carvings gave a silent testimony to a long-forgotten civilization. Suddenly, from behind a pile of rubble, a wolf emerged. Its movements were cautious yet deliberate, its golden eyes glinting in the dim light. However, what caught their attention was not the wolf itself, but what it carried in its mouth, the very knife that Atreus had been searching for. Hey, that's mine! Atreus shouted as he stepped forward. His voice echoed faintly against the stone walls, but the wolf only looked at him briefly before turning away. Despite Atreus' ability to communicate with animals, an extension of his own godhood and his giant heritage, the wolf did not respond. Instead, it bolted deeper into the ruins, disappearing into the shadows ahead. Without hesitation, Atreus ran after it. Atreus! Kratos called out in his deep voice, but his son either did not hear him or chose to ignore him. His determination to retrieve his mother's knife outweighed everything else. Kratos immediately followed, his heavy steps shaking the ground beneath him. Zelos also began running, though at a calmer pace, his expression focused but not rushed. They could both hear Atreus' voice echoing through the ancient halls, a trail of shouts that guided them deeper into the ruins. After several turns and a brief sprint through the narrow corridors, they finally reached a large chamber illuminated by faint blue crystals embedded in the walls. There, they saw Atreus standing near the wolf, slowly approaching it with his hand extended as if to calm it. But before Zelos could warn him, the boy crossed the threshold of the chamber. Wait, Atreus! Zelos shouted, recognizing the place. His voice echoed through the ruins, but it was already too late. As soon as Atreus entered, the iron gate behind him slammed shut with a loud metallic clang, sealing him inside. Kratos and Zelos ran toward the barrier, but the thick gate held firm. Through the gaps, they saw several grown men surrounding Atreus, their weapons drawn. Atreus tensed immediately, panic flickering in his eyes. He had faced monsters before, but not men, not humans with intent and reason behind their attacks. Remember what we said, Atreus, Zelos called out, focusing his magic on the gate. A glowing Zoltrak shot from his hand, striking the metal surface, but it barely left a dent. The barrier was reinforced with protective runes. Zelos gritted his teeth and fired again, and again, summoning multiple Zoltraks to overload the magical defenses. He refrained from using anything stronger, knowing a larger spell could harm Atreus inside. Kratos, watching his son surrounded, called out in his commanding tone, Atreus, focus. It is your fight. Zelos, faster. Atreus took a deep breath, remembering his father's words and the lessons they had taught him. Fear gave way to instinct. As one of the men charged forward, Atreus drew his bow, steadying his aim. The arrow flew true, striking the man directly in the forehead. The attacker fell instantly, and Atreus froze, staring at what he had done. At that same moment, Zelos unleashed a final surge of magic. The protective runes shattered, and the gate exploded outward, sending fragments of metal across the floor. Kratos and Zelos rushed in immediately, their expressions hardened. Zelos raised his hand again, summoning several Zoltroks that shot upward, striking the mages stationed on the upper platforms who had been preparing spells of their own. The concentrated light pierced through them in perfect precision, silencing their chanting at once. Meanwhile, Kratos threw his Leviathan axe, cleaving an attacker cleanly in half. Atreus, shaking but resolute, continued firing his arrows, striking 2 more before the battle finally ended. When the last enemy fell, silence filled the chamber once again. Zelos looked around briefly before turning to Atreus, who stood still, breathing heavily. A faint smile crossed Zelos' face. Congratulations, Zelos said evenly. You've killed your first man. I wish I could say it will be your last, but life rarely gives such mercy. Still, the road ahead is long. You will learn what it means to live with that choice. Atreus lowered his bow slightly, his voice quiet. It feels different than I imagined. When I shot the arrow, it felt like it hit me too. Kratos approached him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. It is not a feeling to enjoy, he said. But do not carry it as guilt. They sought to harm you, and you acted to survive. Remember this lesson. In battle, mercy and hesitation can cost you your life. Atreus nodded slowly, understanding but not yet accepting. As he steadied his breathing, the wolf stepped forward again. It gently dropped the knife at Atreus' feet before turning its gaze toward Zelos. What to do with you, little one? Zelos said, crouching down to meet its eyes. After a brief moment of thought, he extended his hand, channeling a strange energy toward the wolf. The creature's body began to glow softly. The energy that Zelos transferred carried a fragment of his own primordial essence, a compressed form of the ancient power flowing through his veins. It merged with the wolf's heart, changing its structure so it could absorb small traces of the same energy, though at a far lesser rate. Fell, Zelos said after a short pause, naming the beast. A dark symbol appeared beneath the wolf's paws, an abyssal mark glowing faintly as it engraved itself into the ground. The same mark shimmered on the wolf's chest, binding its existence to Zelos. Both Kratos and Atreus watched quietly, observing the process without interrupting. They had no idea what exactly was happening, only that the light and the shifting symbols carried a deep, ancient power. When the glow faded, the wolf's appearance had changed. Its fur shimmered with streaks of deep silver mixed with black, and its eyes had turned to a vibrant, glowing blue. Zelos smiled faintly. The wolf then dissolved into a dark mist and sank into Zelos' shadow, disappearing from sight. That's how I create a summon, Zelos said, glancing at Kratos and Atreus. Both of them looked at him blankly, not understanding the process. All they had seen was Zelos pulling out an orb of 5 colors, a burst of blinding light, and the wolf's transformation. Neither knew how any of it worked, and neither asked further. The 3 of them continued their journey, walking deeper through the cave system. The air grew colder as they moved, until at last they saw light ahead. Exiting the cavern, they were greeted by the brightness of the outside world, the sunlight reflecting softly across the snow. They followed the path forward until a strange sound reached their ears, a mix of growling and shouting. As they approached, they found the source. A broken bridge stretched across a chasm, and at its center lay a large, odd-looking creature refusing to move. Behind it, a small blue figure, possibly a dwarf, was shouting and pushing at the creature's back with all his strength, yet the creature didn't budge at all, its massive body blocking the way entirely. 27 comments 0 vote. Chapter 20. Brock. The blue-skinned dwarf standing before them was none other than Brock, someone Zelos recognized almost immediately. That distinct skin color was unlike anything found in these realms. Draugrs had bluish bones, but their flesh was lifeless gray, not vivid blue. Brock's color stood out, and it gave Zelos a sense of familiarity he could not ignore. His gaze then shifted toward the nearby trees, where the large creature that Brock had been yelling at was half hidden among the shadows. Get up and move your ass. I'll kick you square in the ringer if you don't move. Kamoon. What are you waiting for? Come on already. Let's go. Move. Brock shouted with irritation, smacking the creature's hindquarters with a loud slap. His voice echoed through the forested ruins until he finally noticed the group approaching from the trail. Can't get this slowy yet cocklump to cross the bridge. Brock grumbled, glaring at the creature while wiping sweat from his forehead. He gave it another slap, though it barely reacted. It's because it's scared, Atreus said after observing it for a moment. Something's hiding in the forest. He turned toward Kratos to say more, but before he could, Zelos raised his hand calmly. A faint glow formed around his fingers as he whispered a word. A bright Zoltrak shot forward, striking the creature cleanly in the head. It collapsed instantly, its massive body hitting the ground with a thunderous sound that shook the planks of the bridge. You were right, Kratos said to Atreus, his deep voice steady, as he looked at the fallen beast. Brock, still holding his whip, turned to them with a puzzled expression. You must be smart or something, boy. You are a boy, right? He asked, squinting at Atreus. Atreus simply nodded, unsure what to make of him, while Zelos stood by quietly, watching the exchange with mild amusement. Brock then turned toward Zelos, raising an eyebrow. And you, he said, you're a strange one too. Ain't never seen magic like that before. Zelos chuckled lightly. Probably because you don't use this kind of magic. Ah, must be, Brock replied with a grunt. He turned back toward the creature, giving it another kick. When it still didn't move, Atreus took a step closer. Veer alone, Atreus whispered. The words flowed with quiet confidence. The creature suddenly stirred, rose to its feet, and began walking across the bridge without resistance. Brock blinked, slightly impressed, his mouth hanging open for a second before he nodded. You've got some tricks, kid, Brock muttered. Atreus smiled faintly, patting the creature's neck as they walked together. Kratos and Zelos followed closely behind, their eyes scanning the surroundings. Does it have a name? Atreus asked, glancing at Brock. I don't know. The rude bastard never asked mine, so I never asked hers, Brock replied, his tone half serious and half joking. Well, what's your name then? Atreus asked. Brock, the dwarf answered proudly. The name carried a weight of craftsmanship and stubbornness. The group continued across the bridge until Brock walked up beside Kratos, his eyes falling on the axe resting on Kratos' back. Say, you're not gonna believe me, but that axe you got there, it was me what made her. Me and my brother. One of our best works, that one. Don't let anyone else mess with her except the two of us. You gotta handle her special, or she'll break beyond fixin'. I can enhance her for you right now, if you'd let me. So, what do you say? Kratos kept walking until they crossed the bridge before finally responding. You were right. I don't believe you. He gestured to Atreus and Zelos. Come. Brock frowned, muttering under his breath, then spoke louder. There's a rune in the shape of a fork, under the grip. Look for it. He raised his hand, showing a faintly glowing symbol burned into his palm. Kratos paused, turned the axe slightly, and found the exact rune Brock mentioned carved into the handle. His eyes narrowed slightly. That was our brand, Brock said, tapping the mark on his hand. My brother and me, before we split. I got half of it right here. See. Look. You want me to upgrade her or not? Kratos studied him for a long moment, then finally said, very well. I expect improvement. He handed the axe to Brock, who received it with quiet pride. As Brock began inspecting the weapon, Atreus stepped closer, his curiosity getting the better of him. Where's the other half of the brand? My brother's got it, Brock answered, his chest puffed out. When we split, he took his half, but I got all the talent. Zelos chuckled quietly, shaking his head. You're the Brock of the Huldra brothers, aren't you? Brock stopped his work momentarily and looked up. What do you know about me and my brother? He asked, curiosity replacing his irritation. Not much, Zelos replied. Only that you two forged Mjolnir, the hammer wielded by one of the Aesir. Brock smirked slightly. Yeah, that one. One of our greatest works, but the problem wasn't the hammer, it was the one swinging it. Still, a fine weapon. He struck the axe with his hammer, infusing it with a faint blue glow that coursed through its runes. The weapon shimmered briefly, the edges sharper, the aura stronger. Kratos accepted the axe back, inspecting it with care. Even without testing it, he could feel the difference. Zelos nodded approvingly. A weapon is never evil by itself, only in the hands of those who misuse it. And by the looks of you, it seems you've paid a heavy price for your craft. Brock blinked. What's that supposed to mean? Zelos turned his eyes toward him. You're missing part of your soul, he said simply. That's why your body's turned blue. You share the same hue as the undead, though you still live. Kratos and Atreus both looked at Brock, visibly surprised. Brock, for his part, froze. Are you serious? He finally asked. Yes, Zelos said. Every living being has 4 parts of the soul. You have only 3. Zelos was about to elaborate further when a low growl echoed from the trees. The same type of creatures they had fought earlier burst from the forest, surrounding them. Kratos gripped the axe tightly, testing its new edge, while Zelos began casting his spells. Atreus fired his arrows in precise succession, covering his father's flank. The battle didn't last long. Kratos' swings were sharper, his strikes faster. Zelos' magic lit the battlefield, each Zoltrak vaporizing whatever it touched. When the last monster fell, Brock stood silently, his expression thoughtful. He had seen Zelos fight, had seen the kind of control he possessed over his magic, and something about it gave him an idea. As the group began walking away, Brock suddenly called out, "Wait." He ran toward them, causing Kratos to turn instinctively, though Zelos raised a hand slightly to signal there was no danger. "Can you complete my soul?" Brock asked, his tone surprisingly earnest. Zelos smiled faintly. "For a price. Name it," Brock said without hesitation. "I want to learn the magic your kind uses to travel between realms," Zelos said calmly. "As a dwarf, I assume you know it." "That's it?" Brock asked, surprised by the simplicity of the request. "That's it," Zelos replied. "Unless you'd like to offer more, but my price has already been set." Brock crossed his arms, thinking for a moment. His eyes shifted to Atreus, who stood nearby holding his bow. "All right," Brock said finally. "Complete this job for me, and I'll rework this boy's bow so it doesn't need arrows anymore." "Then we have a deal," Zelos said, summoning a large circular pattern of light beneath their feet. The intricate design resembled a transmutation circle, its lines pulsing with energy. Brock and Zelos stood opposite each other, one on the northern line and the other on the southern. "I, Zelos, vow to restore Brock's missing soul in exchange for his teachings of Dwarven realm magic and the enhancement of Atreus' bow," Zelos declared. His side of the circle began to glow. "I, Brock, vow to teach Zelos Dwarven realm magic and enchant the boy's bow in exchange for the return of my soul," Brock said firmly. Half of the circle lit up, and the light converged in the center before expanding outward. For several moments, the glow filled the forest, then faded completely. When it was done, Zelos raised his right arm, revealing a glowing mark etched into his skin. Brock removed one of his gloves and saw the same mark mirrored on his palm. "The vow is sealed," Zelos said calmly. "It will remain until our agreement is complete. The mark also allows me to sense your soul, ensuring it doesn't wander too far. Farewell for now, Brock." Zelos turned away, and Kratos began walking as well. Atreus lingered for a moment, giving Brock one last glance before following them down the trail. "I can't believe you got a dwarf to enhance my weapon," Atreus said as they walked. "It was unnecessary," Kratos replied bluntly. "I know," Zelos said with a small smile. "But I wanted to help him. After all, he forged the weapon that mother passed down to you, father." Kratos fell silent, saying nothing more as they continued their journey beneath the quiet canopy of trees, their footsteps fading into the distance. 37 comments 0 vote. Chapter 21. Hunt with Atreus. As the three continued their journey, they came across another cave system, its entrance half-buried under thick roots and moss. Without hesitation, they entered, the air cold and stale. Zelos lifted his hand and created a sphere of light that floated above them, illuminating their way. The magic was based on the light magic he had developed long before, around the same time he first experimented with time magic. Its glow spread softly across the cavern walls, revealing the remnants of Old Norse carvings and bones scattered across the ground. As they went deeper into the cave system, the air grew colder and heavier, and the silence became unnerving. Then they saw them, dozens of draugrs standing still, frozen mid-motion, as though trapped between life and death. This time, some of them were different, they were surrounded by faint elemental auras. Fire and ice intertwined between the rows of corpses, their lifeless eyes ready to awaken the moment sound or movement disturbed them. "There sure are a lot of draugr around here," Atreus muttered quietly, raising his bow as he glanced at the unmoving figures. Kratos drew his axe, ready to strike, but Zelos extended his arm to stop him. "Father," Zelos said calmly, "your axe will do little against those infused with ice. You need the opposite element to harm them properly. I'll handle the ice ones. You focus on those with fire, and Atreus will provide support." Kratos looked around carefully, studying the frozen soldiers before nodding in agreement. "Understood," he said. Without further warning, Zelos conjured several fiery arrows from thin air and released them in rapid succession. The burning projectiles pierced through the icy draugrs, instantly melting and vaporizing them where they stood. At the same time, several glowing circles appeared in the air around him. Zoltrak spells, their energy pulsating before shooting forward to hunt down the remaining enemies. The beams struck with surgical precision, each one vaporizing a Draugr into ash. Atreus quickly followed Zelos's lead, enchanting his own arrows with fire, mimicking the spell he had watched countless times before. His shots hit the Draugrs that Kratos could not reach, while Kratos cleaved through the fiery ones with his axe, the weapon cutting cleanly through their burning bodies. In less than 10 minutes, the cavern fell silent again, only the sound of their footsteps echoing through the tunnels. They pressed onward, encountering more creatures along the way, small wretches, crawling corpses, and even a revenant that hissed from behind a broken wall. The revenant proved faster than most, slipping away from direct attacks, but Zelos grinned as his Zoltrak spells continued tracking it relentlessly. The revenant tried to evade, but the homing beams circled back, striking its body repeatedly until it collapsed, shrieking, before disintegrating into smoke. Ha 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 ha. That's why I love this spell, Zelos said proudly, brushing dust from his coat while pointing at the dissolving remains. Atreus laughed quietly, impressed by the precision, though Kratos remained expressionless as usual. After several more hours of navigating the tunnels, they reached a massive lift powered by ancient chains. Rather than wasting time with its worn mechanisms, Zelos simply raised his hand and cast a levitation spell. The trio floated smoothly toward the top, passing through old metal beams and crumbling platforms until they emerged into daylight once again. When they stepped outside, the fog was thick, and the mountain loomed ahead, massive and gray, its peak hidden behind clouds. The view stretched across the forest, the same one that surrounded their home. Even though Zelos had seen many landscapes before, he still found himself quietly admiring the sight. Nature is truly a thing of beauty, Zelos said, stepping forward to take it all in. Atreus followed beside him, his eyes wide. Wow, never been this close to the mountain before. Looks so big, Atreus whispered. I wish Mom were here to see it. Kratos stood a few steps behind them, his gaze heavy. For a brief moment, he lifted his hand as though he wanted to rest it on their shoulders, to comfort them both, but his arm fell back to his side. He turned away. Zelos, Atreus, we leave, Kratos said, his tone firm. Both sons nodded quietly, snapping out of their thoughts before following him down the rocky path. They walked until they reached a large stone door blocking their way. In front of it stood a shallow bowl filled with fine sand, and strange glowing runes appeared above the door as they approached. As we are, we two, we three. As I alone can never be, Atreus read aloud, furrowing his brow in thought. Kratos remained silent, analyzing the runes, while Zelos stepped forward after a short pause. The answer is family, Zelos said confidently. He bent down and wrote the rune for family into the sand. The runes above them flared brightly, a deep hum echoing through the cavern as the door unlocked and slowly opened. I'm happy we met Brock, Atreus said softly, but I'm even happier we're leaving this place. The three continued forward, entering another cave-like tunnel that led upward. They followed the twisting passage until daylight appeared once again. Near the exit, Kratos stopped and crouched down. Atreus. Zelos. Tracks, he said. Atreus knelt beside him, running his fingers along the ground. It's a bore. Don't worry, father, I'll find it, he said proudly. Good. It is important for a warrior to keep his skills sharp, Kratos replied, his tone approving yet measured. They followed the trail out into the forest once again. From above, they could see a massive structure resembling the ribcage of some long-dead creature jutting out from the terrain. As they descended the path toward it, the ground trembled, and a fire troll emerged from behind a boulder, roaring. Without hesitation, Kratos charged forward, swinging his axe at the troll's leg while Zelos fired a Zoltrak beam at its head. The troll blocked with its heavy stone pillar, the magic piercing through but losing enough energy to deflect off-center. Enraged, the creature slammed the pillar down, igniting it with fire and sending out a wave of heat and debris. Zelos quickly formed a barrier of magic around Kratos and Atreus, shielding them from the explosion. Kratos then grabbed the pillar still embedded in the ground, lifted it with both hands, and slammed it into the troll's knee with immense force. The creature howled in pain. Zelos followed up, firing 2 more Zoltrak beams that struck the troll directly in the head, killing it instantly. We did it! Atreus shouted, having loosed several arrows into the creature's eyes during the fight. His accuracy impressed even Kratos, who gave a brief nod of approval before they continued down the forest path. They passed by several carvings of runes, each depicting the Nornir, the fates of this realm. Kratos muttered as he walked, the fates. No good comes from them. As they continued, a sharp cry echoed through the trees, a wounded animal's call. Kratos looked ahead. Boy, I hear your animal. It's close. They moved quietly until they spotted the boar grazing peacefully in a small clearing. Aim and fire when you're ready, Kratos said, watching Atreus take position. Atreus aimed confidently, recalling his training with both his father and Zelos, but released the arrow too early. The shot hit, yet failed to pierce the hide, bouncing off harmlessly. The boar lifted its head, startled, and bolted into the forest. But, I hit it. Didn't I? It looked like it bounced off. Could the boar be magical? Atreus said, lowering his bow. Never assume your target is ordinary, Zelos advised calmly. Use your full strength, no matter what it is, magical or not. Atreus nodded, expression serious now. The three set off again, following the tracks deeper into the woods. Before long, they reached a ruined camp swarming with draugrs. Great. Them again, Atreus muttered as the undead began to stir once more. The ensuing battle was swift. Kratos crushed the first line with his axe, Zelos' magic beams tore through the rest, and Atreus struck any that slipped past. When the final draugr fell, silence returned to the forest, and they pressed on, determined to find the boar. 29 comments 0 vote. Chapter 22, The Witch in the Woods. As the three continued their pursuit of the wounded magical boar, they reached the far end of the ruined camp where they had just finished fighting the draugrs. In front of them stood several tall stone columns, arranged as if to block the path deeper into the forest. Zelos took a moment to inspect them, then raised his hand slightly. With a thought, the columns lifted into the air through telekinesis, the sound of stone grinding faintly echoing around the clearing. Beneath the lifted columns, a narrow pathway revealed itself, leading into the misty forest beyond. The three entered, moving cautiously along the newly uncovered trail. The air grew still again, only the soft rustling of leaves filling the silence. Then, not far ahead, they spotted the boar standing quietly between the trees, its body glowing faintly with faint runic markings across its hide. Atreus prepared his second shot, drawing an arrow and raising his bow, while Kratos stood behind him, watching closely. Relax your shoulders, Kratos instructed firmly. Accuracy over speed. Atreus nodded, trying to steady his breathing, but before Kratos could say anything more, the boy spoke up. I got it. Elbow up. Steady hand. Relax. Accuracy over speed, Atreus whispered to himself as he aimed carefully. The forest seemed to hold its breath with him. His fingers loosened, and the arrow shot forward with much greater force than before. It struck the boar squarely in the side, finally piercing its thick hide. The boar shrieked in pain, its voice echoing through the woods. Atreus's eyes lit up, and he leapt in joy, pumping his fist in the air. Yes, he exclaimed, smiling proudly. Go. Do not lose your prey, Kratos said, giving his son a small nudge forward. Realizing the wounded boar was now running, Atreus sprinted after it immediately, vanishing into the dense trees. In his excitement, he didn't notice that the small knife his mother Faye had given him slipped from his belt and fell to the ground. Kratos saw it fall and picked it up silently. He and Zelos exchanged a knowing look, both understanding how easily Atreus could get lost if they delayed. Without a word, they followed. As they went deeper, the forest began to change. The air thickened, and fog rolled in from every direction, growing denser with each step. Soon, the two could barely see the ground beneath their feet. The white mist swallowed the trees and the path alike until even each other's outlines began to fade. Zelos frowned and raised his palm, summoning a strong gust of wind that rushed outward. The wind tore through the fog, parting it for a moment and revealing faint shapes of trees and rocks ahead. Atreus! Where are you? Kratos shouted, his voice echoing into the fog. Here, father. Zelos, hurry, I found it. Atreus called back from somewhere deeper inside the forest. Both Kratos and Zelos began moving toward his voice, but the fog seemed to distort the sound, making it hard to tell which direction it came from. Atreus called again, his voice shifting slightly as if carried by the wind. One day, I really need to put a tracker spell on him, Zelos thought with a sigh as he and Kratos pressed forward. Suddenly, another voice rang out, this one female, filled with anger and fear. What did you do? The woman shouted, her tone sharp and accusing. Kratos and Zelos immediately increased their pace. They followed the sound through a narrow passage wedged between two large rock formations. Zelos extended his hand again, shattering part of the rock wall with controlled force, creating a wider path for them to move through. After a few moments of running, they emerged into a wide, open glade. The trees here were different, their bark shimmered faintly, and their leaves bore colors not found in the outer forest. At the center of the clearing, Atreus knelt beside the injured boar, while a woman knelt opposite him, her hands pressed gently against the creature's side. I'm sorry, Atreus said quickly, his voice trembling. We didn't know it belonged to anyone. He doesn't belong to anyone, the woman replied sharply, her tone softening slightly as she continued tending to the animal. He's my friend. Zelos and Kratos approached. The woman's hands glowed faintly as she pressed against the boar's wound, but the bleeding didn't stop. The boy was following my command, Kratos said, lowering himself slightly as if offering an apology. He extended his hand toward her, but before he could speak further, she grabbed his wrist and placed it firmly over the wound. Then help me fix it, she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. Before Kratos could act, Zelos stepped forward and extended his own hand. A magic circle appeared above the boar, spinning with intricate symbols. Reverse heal, he muttered. A green light poured from the circle, cascading over the creature like gentle rain. The woman's expression shifted from anger to shock as she watched the magic work. The wound on the boar began to seal, the blood fading as if time itself was turning backward. Within moments, the injury vanished completely, leaving only smooth, unbroken skin. The boar twitched, then stood up shakily before letting out a soft grunt and running off into the trees, healthy once again. There, Zelos said, lowering his hand. It's fixed. The woman stared at him, astonishment written all over her face. She had seen many kinds of magic in her lifetime, but this was something entirely different. What was that? She asked, turning her gaze directly on him. Zelos said nothing at first, simply meeting her eyes. Kratos placed a hand on Zelos's shoulder, giving him a small nod that silently said it was fine to explain. It's a type of healing magic I created myself, Zelos replied. It combines restoration magic with a time-based principle. It returns the target's body to an earlier, uninjured state. However, it cannot revive the dead. Once life is gone, this spell has no effect. The woman listened closely, her eyes widening in curiosity and awe. How fascinating, she said softly. In all my years, I have never seen such a thing. Your magic is truly remarkable. Zelos simply smiled. Thank you. It's something I've refined for a long time. The woman tilted her head, looking at him more closely. There was something in his face, something that reminded her of someone she had once known. For a brief moment, her expression softened. Thank you for saving my friend, she said gently. That act deserves a gesture of gratitude. She stepped forward and placed a hand on Zelos's shoulder, her touch warm and calm. There's no need, Kratos interrupted, his tone firm. We caused the harm. It is not our place to receive payment. The woman smiled faintly but shook her head. Please, I insist. I have little with me here, but if you follow me to my home, I can offer proper thanks. She turned and began walking down a small, moss-covered path leading deeper into the forest. Zelos and Atreus exchanged glances before both looked at Kratos, who regarded the woman silently. After a long pause, he nodded once. Very well, he said quietly. And with that, the three followed her deeper into the enchanted woods. 37 comments 0 vote. Chapter 23. Goddess Freya. As the three continued walking toward the deeper parts of the forest, Zelos could not help but appreciate the calm beauty that surrounded them. The autumn colors painted the trees in warm shades of red and gold, the air was cool, and the faint scent of fallen leaves lingered with each breath. The forest that Freya had made her home in was unlike any other place they had seen in Midgard. Even from a glance, Zelos could sense the layers of enchantment surrounding it, subtle but incredibly powerful. The magic flowed naturally through the ground and trees, cloaking the entire area from any outside perception. It was a spell so strong that even his own eagles, who normally could see through barriers and illusions, could not detect anything beyond the edge of these woods. It was a perfect ward for protection, and Zelos silently admired the skill behind it. Freya continued walking ahead of them, moving gracefully as though she had walked that path countless times. Atreus followed closely behind her, full of energy and curiosity, constantly looking around at the glowing plants and faintly shimmering roots beneath their feet. Kratos, in contrast, remained quiet, his eyes carefully scanning the environment. His posture was that of a seasoned warrior entering unfamiliar territory, cautious but controlled. After several minutes, the group arrived at a massive tree that towered above the rest of the forest. Its trunk was so wide that it could have taken 10 men holding hands to encircle it. Atreus stopped and stared at it in awe. You live in a tree? Atreus asked innocently, tilting his head upward to take in its size. Before Freya could answer, Zelos noticed faint movement at the edge of the clearing. Several draugrs were shambling toward them from between the trees. Without speaking, Zelos extended his hand, summoning several Zoltrak spell circles in the air. They appeared with a faint hum, then released bursts of concentrated plasma light that struck the approaching draugrs instantly, vaporizing them into ash before they could take another step. Freya glanced at him momentarily but said nothing, only turning back to Atreus with a calm smile. Not in it, she said gently. Below it. Freya then looked toward the giant turtle resting beneath the tree. With a soft command, the creature stirred and slowly lifted itself, revealing a wooden cabin built beneath its shell. Backslash. The door and windows became visible as the turtle rose, and Atreus gasped in amazement. Once inside, the cabin felt warm and alive, its interior lined with herbs, bottles, charms, and ancient carvings. Freya began moving about, collecting ingredients from shelves and containers, clearly preparing something. However, after a few moments, she paused and frowned slightly. It seems I am missing something, she said quietly, turning toward Atreus. Would you help me gather it? I need a plant called lamb's crest. It has white petals and grows just outside in my garden. Of course, Atreus said quickly, eager to be helpful. He left the cabin without hesitation. As the door closed behind him, Freya walked toward Kratos while Zelos remained near the corner, examining the various relics on the wall. Among them, he noticed a pair of wings carefully preserved and mounted. They were unmistakable, the wings of a Valkyrie. Even without touching them, Zelos could feel the faint divine energy still lingering on their feathers. He realized these were Freya's own wings from when she was still the queen of the Valkyries. Titles could fade, but symbols like that remained forever. While he observed the wings, Zelos heard the tone of Freya and Kratos' voices begin to rise slightly. He turned his attention toward them. That is none of your concern, Kratos said in his deep, commanding tone. Freya crossed her arms. The gods of these realms do not take kindly to outsiders, she replied. Trust me, I know. When they find you, and they will make things difficult. The boy will ask questions you may not be ready to answer. As Freya spoke, she caught Zelos looking at her. Her voice trailed off slightly. Do not worry, Zelos said calmly. I already know what father is, and what that means for me. Freya blinked, a trace of surprise in her expression. You told your other son, yet kept it from the younger. She asked, glancing at Kratos. Kratos said nothing, but Zelos stepped in again before the silence could stretch further. He did not tell me, Zelos explained. I can see the true nature of things. The flow of energy, the essence of beings, it reveals what they are, even when they wish to hide it. Both Freya and Kratos froze for a moment, watching him. Kratos' voice rumbled low. What do you mean? Zelos turned slightly and gestured toward Freya. She is a goddess, father. From the aura she carries, the wings displayed here, and the traces of Vanaheim's energy surrounding her, I can tell she is Freya, the goddess of love and former queen of the Valkyries. Kratos turned toward Freya. You are a god? He asked. I was, Freya answered softly. Once the leader of Vanaheim, but no longer. Kratos shifted slightly, his body tensing in readiness, but Zelos raised a hand lightly. There is no need, he said. She cannot harm anyone. She is bound by a curse, one that prevents her from causing injury. Freya's eyes widened. Yes. How did you know that? I can see the chains, Zelos replied. They bind your essence tightly, woven into your spirit. It is an elegant but cruel spell, designed not only to restrict your actions but to confine your soul within Midgard itself. You cannot leave this realm, can you? Freya's expression softened, tinged with sadness. No. I cannot. Kratos looked at her, his voice calmer now. Who would do that to you? The Aesir, Freya answered. Their king, specifically. I warned you, they do not take kindly to strangers. Let this serve as a warning for you and your sons. Hearing this, Kratos' expression eased slightly. He understood too well what it meant to be chained by power beyond one's control. We will take your warning seriously, Kratos said firmly. Freya gave a small nod, then turned her attention back to Zelos, noticing how his eyes glimmered faintly for a brief second before returning to normal. There was something in his gaze that she could not read, something ancient and quiet. After a short while, Atreus returned. His steps were slower this time, and his expression carried a faint sadness. He held the lamb's crest carefully in his hand and offered it to Freya. What's wrong? Freya asked, noticing the change in his demeanor. I lost something, Atreus admitted quietly. Kratos walked over and handed him the small knife. You dropped this when chasing the boar, he said. Atreus took it, his shoulders drooping. What's wrong with me? I should have been more careful. If I had lost it. You did lose it, Kratos interrupted bluntly. Atreus fell silent, lowering his head in embarrassment. Zelos sighed lightly and stepped forward, taking the knife from Atreus's hands. He whispered a few words and a faint magical symbol glowed briefly on the blade before vanishing. There, Zelos said. Now it will always find its way back to you. If you lose it again, I can summon it from wherever it ends up. Atreus's mood brightened instantly, and he smiled as he tucked the knife away. Meanwhile, Freya used the lamb's crest to create a glowing mixture. Zelos quietly listened to the incantations she spoke under her breath, studying the structure of her spell. The magic was ancient, tied to nature and divine protection. This will help protect you and your sons, Freya said as she approached Kratos. Kratos regarded her for a long moment before giving a small nod. Freya placed her hand on his neck and traced a glowing mark that slowly faded from sight. Zelos felt Kratos's aura shift, the man's presence dimmed slightly, as though he had become harder to sense. Freya repeated the process for both Atreus and Zelos, completing the spell with practiced ease. When the enchantments were done, Freya walked to the window and gave a quiet command. The great turtle beneath the house began to lower itself, revealing an opening below that led to a tunnel. There is a shortcut beneath the house, Freya explained. It leads safely out of the woods. Follow the path downward and continue until you see daylight. Will we see you again? Atreus asked hopefully. As much or as little as you wish, Freya replied with a small smile. Now go on. Leave this place before the magic fades. Her voice carried a tone of gentle amusement at the end, almost playful. Kratos grunted softly in acknowledgement and began walking toward the exit. Zelos followed right behind him, and Atreus hurried after them as Kratos called his name, reminding him to keep pace. Chapter 24. World Serpent. As the three of them continued trekking through the winding cave that Freya had guided them to, the sound of dripping water echoed faintly across the stone walls. The path was narrow and dimly lit by patches of glowing moss that faintly illuminated the area. While following Freya's directions, they encountered a group of draugrs stationed just outside the range of a faintly shimmering protective barrier that surrounded the cave's entrance. Without hesitation, Zelos raised his hand, and several orbs of bright energy formed around his fingertips. In a brief flash of light, he muttered the familiar incantation, Zoltrak, and instantly, the draugrs were struck down before they could react. The spell cut through the silence of the cave, leaving behind faint traces of steam where the enemies once stood. Atreus, watching this, couldn't contain his curiosity. He had seen Zelos use that same spell many times before, but never anything else. Kratos noticed the boy's growing curiosity and silently listened, as he too was wondering about the same thing. Zelos, why do you always use that same spell? Atreus asked directly, lowering his bow slightly. Don't you have other kinds of magic you could use? You've only used Zoltrak in that fire spell before. Zelos smiled faintly, his tone calm but confident. Zoltrak is efficient. It's fast, quiet, and doesn't cause unnecessary destruction. It minimizes collateral damage, and the enemies die before they can alert others. But since you mentioned it, maybe next time I'll show you something else. He smiled a little wider, the kind of mysterious smile that made Atreus tilt his head in mild confusion. They kept walking, following the sound of a nearby stream echoing deeper inside the cave. The path was uneven, with small pebbles crunching under their boots as they advanced. Then, suddenly, a sharp screech filled the tunnel, followed by a cloud of dark mist that rushed toward them. From it emerged several floating figures with twisted, screaming faces, nightmares. Nightmares. Atreus shouted, his eyes wide in shock. I thought those were just stories. Mom used to say they'd come for me if I didn't go to bed. He quickly drew an arrow, his bow already raised. Kratos stepped forward, ready to strike, but before either could act, a faint purple glow illuminated the side of the cave. When they turned, they saw Zelos standing still with his right hand extended, his fingers shaped like a gun. A small sphere of condensed purple energy began to form at his fingertip, spinning rapidly as the air around it distorted. Hollow purple, Zelos said quietly. The small orb shot forward almost faster than the eye could track. Everything it touched, rock, dirt, and the nightmares themselves, was immediately obliterated, disintegrated into nothingness. The blast continued forward until it struck the far wall of the cavern, where it exploded with tremendous force, shaking the ground and carving out a massive crater in the stone. Dust and fragments fell from the ceiling, and a low rumble echoed through the entire cave. Atreus stared, mouth wide open in disbelief, as the cave trembled around them. Zelos simply lowered his hand, a faint satisfied smile on his face, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. What the? Atreus finally managed to say, pointing toward the destruction. Zelos turned to him with a teasing smirk and a mock expression of innocence so exaggerated it almost looked like he was mocking Atreus's reaction. What? Zelos replied casually. You wanted to see another spell, didn't you? I said I wanted to see another spell, not a world-ending one. Atreus exclaimed, gesturing frantically toward the massive hole in the wall. Zelos chuckled softly. Please, that's an overstatement. This wasn't even close to my maximum output. That was only about 1% of the total power. A real world-ending spell would look very different. Kratos, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally spoke. What purpose does a spell like that serve, Zelos? His tone wasn't angry, but there was a deep curiosity in his voice. Zelos crossed his arms and answered calmly. It's a fusion spell that merges two opposing forms of magic, repulsion and attraction. The purple glow comes from combining the red and blue energies into a single force. Normally, that process takes time, but I've adjusted it to happen instantly, at a reduced output, so it's safer to use in smaller spaces. If I ever combine both at full capacity, you'd see entire mountain ranges crumble. It's a large-scale extermination spell meant for when you face an overwhelming number of strong enemies. Instead of fighting them one by one, it eliminates everything within a certain range. Atreus's eyes widened further. That's the weakest version, he said in disbelief. Zelos nodded slightly. You never know when something like that might be necessary. It's practical for situations where escape isn't possible. The reason I mostly use Zoltrak around you and Father is to avoid unnecessary destruction. When I'm alone, survival matters more than what the terrain looks like afterward. Kratos said nothing, but his expression softened. He understood the reasoning. If Zelos were ever separated from them, he wanted him to live, regardless of the cost. Atreus also nodded silently, realizing the logic behind his brother's methods. They continued walking, the rumble of the cave slowly fading as they followed the stream deeper underground. After several minutes, the path opened up into a wider cavern where they found a small wooden boat resting by the edge of an underground river, the one Freya had mentioned earlier. The three boarded the boat, and Zelos extended his hand again, conjuring a faint spell that made the oars move automatically, propelling them smoothly through the water. The steady sound of rowing mixed with the faint echoes of the cave walls. Ah, what's that smell? Atreus complained, covering his nose as the stench grew stronger the further they went. It's the ocean, Kratos replied plainly. The ocean smells terrible, Atreus muttered, earning a small chuckle from Zelos, who found the boy's complaint oddly amusing. Eventually, the cave opened into a vast expanse of water. The fog began to thin slightly, revealing a brighter sky above. As they drifted forward, Atreus spotted something large in the distance, a colossal statue half sunken into the water, with faint runes carved into its base. Zelos, over there, Atreus said, pointing toward it. Zelos nodded and directed the oars toward the statue. When they approached, Atreus squinted at the runes. It says, surrender your arms. I guess that won't be a problem for you, huh, father? He said, glancing playfully at Kratos. Kratos stepped up from his seat, holding the Leviathan axe in his hand. He summoned frost over it before hurling it deep into the water. After a few moments, he raised his hand to call it back, but it did not return. The axe did not return, Kratos said, his tone calm but cautious. Wait for it, Zelos said suddenly. Both Kratos and Atreus looked at him in confusion. Wait for what? Atreus asked. Before Zelos could answer, the sea began to move violently. The water churned and rose in waves, the air shaking as if the very world trembled. The fog scattered further, and then a massive, slit-shaped eye opened just beneath the surface near their boat. The Leviathan axe suddenly reappeared beside Kratos' seat, just as the enormous head of the world serpent emerged from the water. Its size was beyond anything Atreus had ever imagined, its body stretching farther than the eye could see. It's the world serpent. Atreus shouted in awe, his excitement replacing all fear. The massive creature opened its mouth and began to speak in a deep, rumbling language neither Kratos nor Atreus could understand. The sound shook the air around them. Zelos listened quietly, not revealing that he understood the words being spoken. It speaks, Kratos said, his tone steady but cautious. Of course, Atreus said with wonder in his voice. Mother told me it's friendly. This is amazing. What does it say? Kratos asked, his gaze fixed on the enormous creature. I don't know, Atreus admitted, still grinning with awe. But this is awesome. As the world serpent continued to speak, the water level around them began to drop slowly, revealing the distant shores and structures hidden beneath the surface. Zelos calmly adjusted the magic guiding the oars and steered the boat toward a nearby dock that had just become visible. The three of them said nothing more for a while, the silence filled only by the echo of water dripping from the massive serpent that still loomed behind them. 41 comments 0 vote. Chapter 25. Bridge to the Mountain. As the three finally docked at the pier, Kratos found himself still thinking about the enormous creature they had just witnessed. The image of the world serpent rising from the water lingered in his mind, its sheer size unlike anything he had ever seen before. Atreus, noticing his father's quiet curiosity, began recounting what he remembered from the stories their mother used to tell them about the serpent and the other beings that lived throughout Midgard. It was a pastime that both Atreus and Zelos had cherished in their childhood, sitting by the fire while Faye shared tales of ancient creatures, divine beings, and the history of their world. Through those stories, she had taught them about their kind's past without ever directly revealing everything about it. It's one of the giants, Atreus began as he stepped out of the boat and onto the dock. His tone carried both excitement and a hint of pride. Mother said the world serpent is so big it could encircle all of Midgard and still be able to bite its own tail. Kratos, following behind, frowned slightly. An exaggeration, he said firmly, his disbelief clear in his tone. Zelos glanced toward the horizon where the world serpent's body rested across the distant mountains. From their perspective, the creature's head alone dwarfed the surrounding peaks, making the entire landscape appear like a model crafted by mortal hands. Perhaps exaggerated, yes, Zelos said calmly. But even you cannot deny the size of it, father. Compared to that creature, the mountains look like small stones. Kratos said nothing further, simply observing the distant serpent while Atreus adjusted his quiver. The three then began walking along the wooden pier that connected to a stone platform ahead. The air smelled of salt and moss, and the echo of water lapping against the dock filled the silence between them. Once they reached the platform, they noticed a worn ladder leading upward. Without hesitation, Kratos climbed first, followed by Zelos and Atreus. When they reached the top, they found themselves standing on the upper section of a large bridge, the stone carved with ancient runes and faint traces of seaweed clinging to its edges. However, before they could move further, several draugrs emerged from the shadows, their bodies covered in moss and soaked with seawater, as if they had risen directly from the depths. The creatures let out distorted growls and began rushing toward the three. Zelos stepped forward immediately, raising his hand as a faint light began to glow around his fingers. Zoltrak, he muttered, and the spell shot out in streaks of glowing plasma, striking the draugrs one after another. He moved carefully, mindful of his surroundings. He didn't want to damage the bridge the way he had destroyed parts of the cave behind Freya's cabin. Each draugr fell swiftly, the light searing through their decayed forms. Though the fight ended quickly, it lacked the thrill that had once come with battle. Zelos sighed quietly as he watched the last of the draugrs crumble into ash. Maybe I shouldn't care too much about the environment anymore, he thought, a faint smirk crossing his face. It's starting to get boring. Kratos and Atreus caught up with him as the three crossed the rest of the bridge. Not long after, they encountered a familiar voice calling out to them. If it isn't the bearded beefcake and his little tagalongs. Have I got something for you three? The unmistakable gruff voice made Atreus blink in surprise. Standing near a workshop setup was Brock, the same dwarf they had met earlier back in the mountain caves. Somehow, he was already here, ahead of them. Amazing, isn't it? Zelos said, his tone casual as he glanced at his companions. Atreus, however, looked at Brock with disbelief. How in the world did he get here before us? Zelos smiled knowingly. It's their magic, he explained as they approached the dwarf's workbench. They can travel between realms by stepping through the gaps in space. It lets them move instantly from one place to another. Most people can't even perceive what's happening when they do it. I've been studying it for a while. Someday, I'll learn how it works. Atreus's eyes widened slightly at that explanation, while Kratos gave a quiet grunt as acknowledgement. All right, hand it over, Brock said abruptly, extending his hand toward Kratos. Without hesitation, Kratos placed the Leviathan axe in Brock's grasp. The dwarf examined it briefly, then slammed his hammer against the axe's head several times. Each strike sent out a bright spark of blue light that pulsed through the weapon. When Brock finally handed it back, the faint glow from the axe felt stronger, sharper, its edge brimming with new energy. Zelos observed carefully. He could sense the difference in the weapon's energy flow. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, something he knew he couldn't replicate even with his knowledge of magic. Appreciate it, Brock, Zelos said with a polite nod. And don't worry, my part of the deal isn't too far off. Brock grunted in response, clearly not one for unnecessary talk. As the three prepared to leave, the dwarf suddenly called out again. Hey, catch! He tossed a small glowing blue stone toward Kratos, who caught it with one hand and studied it curiously. That there's a key of Yggdrasil, Brock explained, gesturing toward the faintly shimmering stones around them. That pile of rocks over there, those are branches of the world tree. You can use that key to open up a magic door to the branches, a shortcut between the realms. It'll get you back to me quickly if you ever need it. But mind you, it's one way only, straight back here, nowhere else. And whatever you do, don't, and I mean don't ever throw yourself over the edge of the path unless you're real fond of death. Atreus blinked at the explanation, his expression shifting to mild discomfort. Yeah, we'll definitely remember that, he said quickly, realizing the severity of the warning. Kratos gave a quiet grunt of approval toward Brock before pocketing the key. With their business done, the trio moved toward a circular platform nearby. Kratos stepped forward and pulled a lever attached to its side. With a mechanical groan, the platform began to rise slowly, carrying them upward to the topmost part of the bridge once more. The higher they went, the wider the view became, the entire lake stretching out beneath them, calm and reflective. At the center of the platform stood a large horn carved into the stone, its surface decorated with runes and serpent motifs. Atreus's eyes immediately lit up when he saw it. Whoa, father, can we try that? He asked excitedly, stepping closer. Kratos frowned. Without knowing the consequences. No. Atreus sighed, his curiosity clearly unsatisfied. Before he could argue, Zelos spoke, glancing briefly at the horn. That horn is used to summon the world serpent, Zelos explained. But since neither of you can understand its language, there's no reason to blow it right now. Best to leave it alone. We don't want to disturb it without purpose. Atreus reluctantly nodded, accepting the explanation, and stepped back from the horn. The three then continued walking along the bridge, the wind growing stronger as they made their way toward the mountain path ahead. The sun began to pierce through the thinning clouds, and from the distance, the faint rumble of the world serpent could still be heard beneath the waters. Without another word, Kratos, Atreus, and Zelos began their climb toward the mountain, continuing their long journey forward. To be continued. Thanks for watching.